Are we ready to start the meeting?
Yeah.
Are we ready to start the meeting? Thank you. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Housing and Communities Select Committee. I am Councillor Claire Simmons, Chair of the committee, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. This event is being streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and the media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions taking place. Now, I would like to welcome all those in Committee Room 1 at the Kensington Town Hall and everyone watching on YouTube. Before we proceed with the meeting, I would ask members of the committee to make sure that your mobiles are on silent or switched off, please. I think it would be appropriate for us to start with 72 seconds silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Thank you. So, we had apologies for absence. Have we received any apologies? No, that's good. Everyone's here. Declarations of interest. Does any member have an interest to declare? No. Item 3, the minutes. Does the committee agree to sign the minutes of previous meetings as a correct record? Councillor Garland.
I have one change which I've already submitted to you and current on number 7. My suggestion, item 47. My suggestion was that a percentage of up to £5,000 could be rolled over. That was particularly relevant to small member wards where you have smaller budget. It might be helpful to the main budget. I with that change.
So subject to that amendment, it will be agreed to sign the minutes.
Agreed.
Thank you, everyone. Item A4, the action topic. The action tracker can be found on page 171 in the combined pack. Members of the committee have copies separate to the pack. Please note that response addressing the committee's concerns about the Neighbourhood Community Infrastructure Levy was circulated after the tracker was published and will be reported as complete at the next meeting. Does any member of the committee wish to raise a question on this item?
Wondered if we had a deadline for these CLL review. Like we might be seeing it.
A very good question. I think that may come up later in the meeting. We can ask a question.
Do you want us to comment now?
If you have an answer that you can give now, if not, we can have it written.
All I'm saying is it's ongoing at the moment, so we'll come back to you with. Interest.
It's actually quite difficult to comment on it because I only saw it 5 minutes ago. Lying on the table in front of us. I know it's missed out by accident from the papers, but the discussion next time. I think because getting formulating a question, if there is a question, that's a bit different.
Yes, I think that's very sensible. So if members have questions, then perhaps we can bring it to the next meeting, or feel free to email in between. Item A5, Brentford rehousing policies and LRP review. This report provides the Housing and Community Select Committee with a high-level summary of rehousing performance under the 3 main Grenfell rehousing policies: the Grenfell rehousing policy, the Grenfell settled homes policy, and the wider Grenfell rehousing policy, as well as rehousing support provided to households bereaved by the Grenfell Tower tragedy. This report also provides an update on a review of the local lettings plan for Lancaster West Estate and Bramley House. Could I ask any member to introduce?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm very pleased that this is in front of the committee, as our commitment to look after those affected by Grenfell remains the absolute forefront of this council's work, and especially in the housing department. So I think the report is very thorough. I think it clearly explains our policies. So any questions on those, and then the local letting plan is probably more of a scoping out to see what the committee thinks on this. It hasn't gone out to formal consultation yet, so that I'd be very grateful to hear your views on that. And just to put the wider housing needs in the borough in context, Kojo has added the challenges we face as a housing body in general, and all London boroughs are facing this as well. And you can see the needs for the large bed homes is very, very difficult. We have very, very few in the borough, and certainly none available in the borough. So that's any questions, I think.
Can I invite questions from the committee? Greg.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. Firstly, in section 4, 4.3, the Grenfell second moves, Grenfell second settled homes policy, the second moves. We've had a few of those now that have actually happened. And without going into individual cases, I'm wondering if we've had any feedback on how well that's going, and whether some of those families are feeling more settled in their second new home. That's the first question. So the other ones are completely different. So who wants a chance to say the rest?
Yeah, so we, as the sets out, we have had 19 moves. We've not received any major concerns or complaints from those who have moved. However, there are a group of councillors who are awaiting a move, and it has proved quite difficult to find appropriate suitable accommodation that meets their needs. What we are trying to do is we are trying to, in some ways, unlock it via some potential chain moves. So we have agreed to, example, with some of the new build properties and use a small portion that will hopefully help mobilise the moves. And obviously, when those residents vacate those properties, then they will become available for other households. But generally, in terms of answering your question, the ones that haven't been any major concerns with at all.
It might be sort of worth adding to emphasise that for that group, they have the advantage of the kind of wraparound support provided by the dedicated service, which means that there's quite an intensive level of support from the council to help them in the second move. And of course, what the other thing that's worth saying is that the policy is quite clear that the further move is the final move, if you see what I mean. So in a way, people making such a move see that it's a significant decision and the last chance to get it right. And so with the support of the dedicated service, we're really keen to make sure that when they make that decision and choose a place, we all collectively feel that the chances of it being successful are as high as possible, if you see what I mean. So they're very deliberate, considered, and highly supportive in each case.
Well, that's quite encouraging to hear. It's about 1 in 5, I think, the original moves didn't really sort of work out as well as they'd hoped. So you might imagine that not all of the second moves will work out, but for the early days and the efforts that they made to sort of make as many successful as possible. I suppose my second question is almost related to that, and it's the under-occupiers that you referred to. Actually, they're in sections 5, the LLP. They're not really incentivise the under-occupiers to move and free up larger properties.
So we've got we have a dedicated team, which has been newly formed. We had one person that was focused on this for about 2 or 3 years, and now we've expanded it. It's overwhelmed. And they do quite a lot of engagement with the residents who are occupied to encourage them to move. We do incentivize them as well, so there is a financial incentive. I suppose a lot of it is about having communication with them around how difficult it is to maybe have a larger property and the cost implications of having a larger property, the benefits of downsizing. We do talk about some of the issues that affect the wider community in relation to people crowding and the benefits of them moving and how that benefits the community. We have done quite a few initiatives, and we feel that with the increased capacity within the service, we are going to be able to mobilise quite a few. There has been some residents who have chosen to leave the borough, for example, to move to smaller size properties, but it's definitely a relationship piece between the officers and the residents.
Can I just jump in here? Just to say that I've been asking a lot of questions about this because I think it's absolutely essential because as I highlighted, we have only very many large homes. And so it's a real kind of hand-holding exercise as well, because the financial incentive is one thing, but generally an elderly couple it would be who's going to change my electricity bill? Who's going to put my Wi-Fi on? Where's my sofa going to go? Am I still going to be within the same community? So there's a lot of that. I think the team is really doing a huge amount of work on that. And it's not just, even though this is talking about the LLP, local it happens across the borough.
Shall I start at this end?
I have one question on paragraph 8, where you talk about undertaking early engagement on the future of the LLP. What options are you going to be putting on the table?
Sorry.
So this is about the options for the list. And so we because of the timing of this meeting, we are still working up exactly how we articulate those options in the paper. So we weren't able in this update to flesh out the options. It's not. I mean, and the reason for that, at risk of stating the absolute obvious, and we talked about this a bit when it was here last time, is that it's not simply a question of do we carry it on or not. Within those, there are particularly within the option to carry it on, there are a range, but almost an infinite range of possible ways and versions of what that might look like in terms of length of time, eligibility, whether people whether when you close it, people stay on the list or not, whether you're just closing against new entries and so on. So we are still in the process of kind of fine-tuning exactly how we articulate a kind of finite range of options in order for it to be a kind of comprehensible and rigorous process, if you see what I mean. So we can't, that's why sadly for this meeting we weren't able to get into the detail.
But this is why actually it's quite good, because you can give us some ideas or come back with some ideas. I mean, Chair, I don't know if that is
Absolutely. I think it would be helpful to have a timeline on when you might have those options better. And I'm guessing that those options will come from the consultation.
No, I think the approach that we're taking is that I think even for we're aiming to do the process in 2 stages. So this early engagement that's described here, which is very much a kind of going into it, as it were, as an open process. And then what we'll do then at a later stage is probably a kind of a more formal consultation on a preferred option, if you see where we actually say put forward a proposal for what happens, and then there'll be a formal consultation on that. But we're at the stage before that now, where we're going in with a genuine, I mean, I can say honestly, with a genuinely open mind to engage. I think we are going to have to articulate some options as part of that early engagement, just to frame the conversation. If you see what I mean, it's very hard to go into it completely open-ended. But as I say, we'll articulate them in a way that describes how they depend on each other, how, you know, which depend on each other, which are independent, so that we can then get as rich a set of feedback as we can, both from the people directly affected within the line of the existing NRP, but also kind of people on the register more generally. And then that will enable us to come forward with a kind of concrete proposal for the next stage. In terms of timelines, I'm looking at colleagues here. I think we're aiming to start that early engagement process really quite soon.
Within the next.
And the local level plan has been very popular in the area. There was a massive amount of demand, you can see from the figures initially, which has peeled off a bit now. But as Kojo always says to me, it puts a lot more pressure on the rest of the housing industry. So there's always that to weigh up.
Can I ask, could the options be sent to the committee?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when we finalise that document, which underpins the early engagement process, absolutely, we'll circulate it to no problem at all.
That's before the engagement. Could we also have something on the outcome of that engagement? Yeah. Thank you. Anything else? Lord.
First of all, do excuse my squeaky voice. Page 18, 7.6, focuses on homelessness in the borough. I noticed the work that's been done already here. Can I ask, do we have a figure across the borough for those that we would class as permanently homeless?
Do you mean by rough sleepers?
Yes.
I was asking that just the other day. Dan, correct me, I think 10.
Well, the target is 10. In fact, it's tonight is the annual count where officers from the council will be out doing a kind of physical count. I think the most recent figure I saw was 12.
Yeah.
So we're just above that target.
So it fluctuates between 7 and 20 at any given point in time. Generally average, say, about 12.
And can I just confirm this is a situation that we've exhausted every effort and there's nothing else that could be done? And is there any additional plans for this time of year?
So no. Okay. So with the people who are sleeping around, the team regularly engages with them. So we've got a specialist outreach team who goes out and engages with them. There are some insurance sleepers who have been provided offered support, have been provided with accommodation. Some of them have gone into accommodation. Unfortunately, they've been unable to settle, so have returned to the streets. There have been some that have go between boroughs. So, for example, we had a resident who was in Westminster for 10 years or 15 years, and they came here for 10 years, and they went back to Westminster. So we have acquired quite a bit of funding from central government to support this area of work. There was a lot of wraparound support, so it's not just about the rough sleeping, it's also about supporting the other issues that may present itself. The work continues, so it's not a case of, just because the support has broken down, we just leave it there. We do continually engage with the
the outreach team knows most of these people personally quite well because they've seen them.
You can bring something specific about homelessness aspect.
And on your question about the kind of seasonal issues, so there's what's called the SWEP, the severe weather emergency protocol. Yeah. And actually, although that was initially designed principally for periods of very cold weather, it was also invoked that summer, whenever it was 2 years ago, when the temperatures hit 40 for hot weather too, where the Mayor of London coordinates a process whereby essentially we ensure that there is a warm room for absolutely anybody who needs one. As it were, no questions asked. We just get them in a bit. No, it's not unlike the system that was operated during COVID. To kind of recognise that there are people who might choose to be on the street in other circumstances, but who in extreme weather, the first priority is just their welfare to get them in, and then a slightly kind of different process.
Yeah, so we've SWEP.
That kicks in at 0 degrees.
Yeah.
So at this time, they haven't got any information, so they want to be separate.
We can certainly.
Yeah, we can check that. But SWIP is actually going to be activated this week. The anticipated that we hit 0 degrees. That's what we're notified about that today.
Thank you.
With the chair's permission, can I just follow up on that? I appreciate we've got the outreach team, but it would be quite nice if they answer their email occasionally, because we've got a constituency who's been reporting one or two or three rough sleepers in a particular location in my ward twice, maybe till 3 times, twice a day, sometimes or daily. We don't get much response or actions.
Yeah.
I haven't had a response either, so. It
I'll
doesn't seem to
follow
be
that up.
much,
Yeah, we do.
much going on, and so I'm not sure it's as rosy a picture as
I think I know.
I'm sure you will,
talking about,
Joe.
but yeah, I'll follow that.
and it is a difficult case, and there's more than one of them in that position.
Okay. Yeah. I'll follow that up.
Thank you, Greg. Councillor Leonard.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions and a comment. The first question relates to paragraph 5.7, just in relation to the lack of wheelchair accessible and step 3 homes, and contrast with paragraph 5.11, where I note that there are 13 families in need of a step 3 home as part of the LLP. I was just wondering, what is your policy in relation to remedying that issue? And I've got another question, but do you want me to go on or answer that first?
So it's quite challenging. This is arguably the most challenging area in terms of finding accessible units for residents. So part of it is around trying to have some units within the new homes program. Some of it is about looking at our existing stock and seeing whether or not we can do adaptation. So we do have a health and disability team with qualified occupational therapists who do go and do assessments of properties, and where we can do adaptations, we will. But it is a challenging area, because of the availability of suitable ground floor accommodation, and B, because of the demand.
There is a quite planning requirement for new schemes. I mean, almost every new social work home built is likely to be step 3. And there's a provision for wheelchair developments. It's just that inevitably the vast majority of stock available is always going to be stuff that was built several decades ago, and therefore we're stuck with, as Kojo says, the challenge of adapting where we can, and we've got a budget allocated for that, but recognising that for some properties that's just not possible. So
But
it's
also,
often the case
what we touched on earlier, the under-occupying aspect. Some of those are ground floor properties, homes. They may have one step which we can overcome with a ramp. So that whole aspect does help us.
yeah, we can where we know that there's an accessible property which is no longer needed, the accessibility features of which are no longer needed by household, we can particularly focus on trying to free it up.
And then just another sort of couple of questions or comments in relation to the homelessness data, and thank you to Councillor Norton for the question on rough sleeping. So I was interested in that as well. But would it be possible in future to have some sort of comparative analysis? It doesn't have to be detailed, but with the numbers in other London boroughs, because it's quite difficult when you see 328 approaches or 404 inquiries to know, say, compared to Westminster or Hampden, how does that data compare? Is it less? Is it more? Is it good or bad? So I mean that would be my comments. It's quite difficult to understand in the abstract and not having anything to compare it to. And then just my final question in relation to Appendix B, the points award. What is the rationale for the points allocation? Is there, say, guidance in national legislation, or is it purely a council decision? And specifically on adopting and fostering a child, why the exclusion of children with a genetic relationship to their parents? Why only adopted and fostered children getting that 700 points? Because it would seem to me the requirements, say, for an extra bedroom would be the same whether children were genetically related to their parents or whether they were adopted.
Okay. So the way in which we allocate our homes is in line with our allocations policy. So we are mandated by central government to have an allocations policy that complements or adheres to the Housing Act, stroke homelessness reduction act. So we have to afford certain categories of households reasonable preference. And we need to set out how we're going to allocate our homes in accordance with the legislation. So in relation to this question that you've asked about the 700 points, I'm going to ask my colleagues, but I think that this is in relation to adults in social care. Is it fair?
I think also we try to encourage people to adopt and foster. I think so obviously children who have their parents with them, if then the next aspect down below relates to that, when you're lacking to living in bedrooms in the current house, that will relate to that, is that you have a parent and child sharing your room and then you're lacking a bedroom.
But it's certainly not the case that, as it were, it's only an adopted or fostered child would be considered when considering the bedroom need for that family. Whatever as it were the relationship with the child, that they would be considered the bedroom need. It's just that the recognition, in the same way that people at risk of harm or high medical need, that an adopted or fostered child is considered in need of additional support from the council, and therefore would be given a higher priority on the bedroom. But it doesn't, whether the child is adopted or fostered doesn't affect the number of bedrooms that are added.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rossi, and my apologies, I think you may have had a follow-up to one of the previous questions.
I want to go back to the Grenfell rehousing policy on page 15. There's just a couple of questions there. Further down, rehousing households bereaved by the tragedy. So that's a specific group. We're told that 21 households have moved into permanent accommodation. How big is that group? How many households are there that still need to move into permanent accommodation in that group? And then I have a further question on the wider Grenfell rehousing policy. 64 households are registered still for rehousing. And so that strikes me as being quite a long time that they have been waiting. And I just wondered there, are you looking in a specific area? Is it near to the line that's the rest of the state, or are you looking in a wide area, and why that has really taken so long to find alternative homes for those people?
I think for the second category, it's the case, as it were, those households are eligible to bid on properties that come up anywhere in the borough, if you see what I mean. So yes. They will have their place on the register, then their allocation of points, and then they're simply bidding for 4%.
But do they have a specific advantage in that sense?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you're grouping them together. So if they have an advantage, is that within a certain area, or is it?
No, so that policy is not geographically constrained. It's only the local lettings plan, which has this kind of red line around it, if you like. Otherwise, the points allocations under the other policies are just allocations under the allocation scheme and would make merging of in the same way for any property.
And that's presumably this is people. Is it households from the finger blocks or from I don't know?
It's not just the finger blocks. I don't think.
Family house and.
And so it's the wider Grenfell rehousing on the code we're into, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are the ones that are outside of those are the ones that are outside of the walk. So it is the ones that are by the walkways, Treadgold, Bramley.
Yeah. So I mean, how much help do they priorities they get?
So what we've done is that they don't have the same support and rights as what the bereaved and survivors. However, what we have done is we have provided them with the support which is above what we provide for our general homelessness cohort. So for example, if we've got a single applicant who approaches who ordinarily would not be in priority need under provisions of the Homelessness Reduction Act, who comes from that region, we would provide them with additional support. We would probably accept them housing assistance. We would rehouse them in a way in which we wouldn't ordinarily somebody who approaches who is not from who has not presented from that area. So there, even though it's not the same support that is provided to the residents that we've mentioned above, it is above the line.
It's an enhanced priority.
Yes.
Compared to the VA. And then on your first question about the number of bereaved households who are still waiting,
Yeah,
I think we might need to get back to you on that one. I'm not sure we've got that.
thank you.
Yeah, so the households in the wider Brentford rehousing policy, they're afforded £900, and accepted homeless households are afforded £100. So it's quite an enhanced offer in comparison to our general homelessness problem.
Thank you.
Councillor Easy.
Thank you, Chair. It is 7.8. And that's 18. Is about long term under the occupied. I have seen families who have the barrel for more than 20 years, and they miss their links, their relatives and family members and family friends in the barrel. What financial policies you have to return them back to the barrel? Thank you.
Okay, so I suppose this is another part of this conversation. So a lot of the residents who are out of the borough, who are so 80% of the residents, I think that's despite it because it's up to this week. So 80% of the residents who are in temporary accommodation are accommodated out of the borough. However, even though they are accommodated out of the borough, under the current housing policy, they allocations policy, if they're accepted, they've got £100. Depending on their priority and the dates in which they were accepted, they can bid for properties in the borough in the same way as everybody else, whether in the borough or not. And wherever they are in the queue, they will be able to successfully bid for those properties, depending on their priority, depending on their acceptance date, and they can be allocated those properties in the borough. The issue is that unfortunately, due to the volume and of residents who require permanent housing and the volume of lets that we have each year, there is a proportion of residents, whether they are residing in the borough or out of the borough, who are going to have to wait for a sustained period of time to actually successfully bid for a property. There are occasions where we do make direct offers of properties for residents, but that is not restricted to whether they are in the borough or out of the borough. A lot of that is based on the individual circumstances. So, for example, if there's an adapted property that comes up and there's somebody who is in a particular situation, then we are able to make a direct offer. But it's quite difficult to determine how long somebody is going to wait for a property who's out of the borough or in the borough. It's all dependent upon their registration date and their priority.
And to that point, we are trying to have kind of quite realistic conversations, which I don't think we probably need to do a bit more work on, about the reality of, particularly if it's families outside the borough, apologies, about the reality of them actually being able to come into the borough if we don't have large enough homes. And perhaps if they're settled at another school outside the borough, perhaps that needs to be acknowledged. And so that's some work definitely going to be doing.
And certainly the households which tend to wait the longest are unsurprisingly those who need a larger home or an accessible home. But one of the, obviously, kind of from a human point of view, one of the hugely frustrating and difficult things in that situation is this sense of powerlessness that those families have, that they're waiting for us, they have no control over when a suitable property in the borough won't become available. So one of the things that we take really seriously is, as Councillor McVeigh says, making clear, yeah, however frustrating the situation with a social home in RBKC may be, there are other options. So there may be options in the private rented sector, there may be options for a social rented home in another part of London or the country. And so we always work to make sure that households who are waiting, particularly ones who have been waiting a long time, understand what those other options are. They may, of course, choose to keep waiting, and that's completely legitimate, and they have that right. But it feels quite important from a human point of view to give them those options, to give them a sense of agency in their situation, and help them kind of make an active choice about what their preference would be. It's a desperate situation. We're certainly not the only borough facing it, although the particular shortage we have of social rented homes and the particularly high prices in our private rented sector means that the wait for a social rented home in this borough is certainly among the worst.
Yeah. I think what I would add as well is that we do provide bidding support for residents who are in temporary accommodation, awaiting accommodation and permanent accommodation. And again, it's not we don't focus solely on the ones that are in the borough. We try and focus on everybody.
Councillor Gardner, did you want to come in?
Yes, on that paragraph, you talk about 26 families are included in the 92 local hotels. And we all know the importance of eating properly and really you need kitchen facilities for families. What can we do to address that 46 in hotels?
Yeah, so this is a top priority of ours. Families residing in commercial hotels is not an ideal outcome at all. We are working very hard to find alternative accommodation to move them into. The challenges we are facing is around the availability of affordable accommodation. Unfortunately, this isn't the RBKC problem. This is a problem which is nationwide, and it has become very acute over the last 12 months. A lot of private sector landlords have exited the market. Some have asked, we have had our residents who are in private sector property where the landlords have requested the properties back. And part of the problem is we are not actually seeing those properties come back into the market once they're sold. So we are doing a piece of work with our London Council colleagues to see how we can try and source more accommodation to reduce the use of commercial hotels. The recent announcement around the local housing allowance rate increase from April 2024 is hopefully going to help. But it is a very long, difficult process. They're not easy options.
I am pleased to see that the council does understand the detrimental impact that temporary accommodation does have, especially hotels and B&Bs, but also around the borough. So I think the question there is something needs to be done, and what can be done, and how we're going to arrive at some solution we're able to be. Councillor Rossi.
My question is about managing expectations and people who 80% in temporary accommodation outside the borough. To what extent do we make it clear you might never come back? Because I mean, I've had instances where people are quite far outside the borough, but they will keep their child in the same school. They will travel to school every day. They will then, there'll be a litany of complaints about how long that takes. And it's almost like they're kidding themselves that this way they're going to come back. And I mean, I think this is a problem that no one can really solve, but that's making people be more realistic about you found you somewhere outside the borough, which is perfectly okay. That might be one way of helping people. It's just a reality.
Yeah, it's totally.
I think we said that already about agency, so we'll definitely take that away and we'll relook at this and maybe we can pass around what we think could do.
Yeah, there's something about the terminology of temporary accommodation, which obviously contributes to people's sense that this is only an interim measure and that the consumer be resolved. I think we always accept the challenge. We could be making these people kind of really aware of the reality of what it means for them in these conditions.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions, if I may. First of all, this report is on the three main Grenfell housing policies. And maybe that's just a form of words, but I'm wondering what are the other Grenfell rehousing policies?
Well, one of them was actually briefed on today, which is very helpful, about the Grenfell repairs policy. Looking at Doug, who's here. And so for a cohort of Grenfell residents, we have a co-designed, bespoke, fast-track repairs aspect. Would that be about right, Doug?
So it's a Grenfell Housing Service
Yeah.
service standard.
So that's one of those aspects.
Thank you. I was meaning particularly about rehousing.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so we've got the Grenfell rehousing policy, which is different. We've got the wider Grenfell policy,
Housing.
and then we've got the central home.
So those are the three main ones.
Oh, I see. So the question is, are there any others we would class as main?
Yeah.
I don't think there are. I think it's just a term of phrase.
So how much?
Alton, does Alton want to jump in? Got to see Alton.
These are the policies. There's no other sort of Grenfell rehousing policies. It's the main Grenfell rehousing policy in relation to housing the former residents of Grenfell Tower, Grenfell Walk, the wider Grenfell policy which we talked about, the second homes move, which is the Grenfell Sales Home policy, and the local lettings plan. But there isn't anything else is captured within the umbrella of all policies, which is the allocation scheme.
Thank you. So in terms of rehousing households bereaved by the tragedy, what policy is that?
Households,
Main
yes, the
housing
main allocation policy.
Okay, thank you.
So the allocations policy underpins all of our allocations, and all of the other policies follow from the main allocations policy.
Those are the separate distinct policy for the bereaved and waitress. We can manage the process that's described in 4.4 and 4.5 just under the aegis of the main allocation.
Even though they lived elsewhere, maybe out of borough.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So then my other question on the Grenfell rehousing policy. 4.1 refers to households which are eligible. And this suggests to me that there may be Grenfell Tower and Grenfell Walk households, former households, who might be ineligible. That be correct to say?
Well, okay, so I've only been here for 2.5 years, and there are not.
So Alton, then.
I think specialist.
So the in relation to Grenfell Tower and Grenfell Walk residents, anyone whose main home was immediately before the tragedy was at Grenfell Tower and Grenfell Walk is eligible. There is no one. There was sort of immigration legislation that was changed to include people who didn't even have status be brought within the umbrella, and understandably so. So I can assure you that everyone who is eligible is anyone whose main home was at the tower with the walk.
But the number of households that's eligible is larger than the number of homes that were in the tower and walk. So some of those households have split since. And so when we talk about eligible households, that doesn't map absolutely onto the household formulation that there was at the time of the fire happened.
And that explains that wording. Thank you very much. So then on 3.2 and 3.3, we see we're looking now at the LLP. This was agreed by leadership on January the 9th, 2019. And my question is, what about people in the vicinity, or indeed in the walkways, Lancaster West in particular? What about those residents who may have not been able to access that policy because their needs had to be moved before? So is there any retrospective aspect to the LLP?
Oh, I see what you're saying, from a data point in time, yeah. I
So
think
that's-
There might be some
I think it was
whose family was so traumatised, they had to be moved, and this policy was not in place at that time.
Okay,
Then this policy comes into place, and then we have families, children falling through the gaps, not having any support whatsoever, perhaps even being housed out of the borough.
so my,
And then this policy comes in, and they're not able to access.
so my understanding of it is that,
Okay.
look, my understanding of it is that, there were some issues raised around the time, and the team had to consider the issues, as similar, for example, with the settled homes policy. So you try and resolve the issues as much as possible before the implementation of the policy. Once the policy is actually implemented, that defines how you deal with those households. Any household who has moved prior to the implementation date of the policy, I don't think the policy allows us to look retrospectively, but that doesn't stop us from actually reassessing households and seeing what kind of wider support we can provide for them.
Yeah, so if we were approached by a household situation.
Can we bring Robin? Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, just really briefly. The two policies that came in a little bit later, the wider Grenfell policy and the local elections plan. The wider Grenfell policy, that was applied retrospectively, so the qualified for that policy, but we were already insisting we automatically applied the wider Grenfell policy in the priority. With the local lettings plan, I think that the challenge was that there were tenants who wished to remain on the estate and in Bramley House, but had housing needs that were not being addressed directly, but certainly not as well as we would like to the main allocation scheme. So they were living on the estate. There were a few residents, tenants who did move away, but the vast majority returned home or stayed in the home and wanted to stay. So working with the residents, working with Sonia here and others, the local lettings plan came about a little bit later to address the housing needs of those households that remained there. A number of families did move into temporary accommodation and then moved back eventually, and would then apply for the local lettings plan or the wider Grenfell policy. To be honest, at that point in time, it wasn't feasible to bring all these policies through at the same time. We had to kind of focus on survivor households and then kind of move out to other needs as well, and listen to the residents in terms of what policies we needed and what kind of needs we had to address at the time as well.
Thank you. Did I see your hand go up?
Yeah, I think that can be resolved if actually I'll have a comment on the proposed engagement or how you're going to review the policy. If there's that engagement in terms of co-creating those options and agreeing the scope of the review of the local lettings plan, because that can be easily reviewed that way, because you can't go back. But as part of your review, rather than being very simple and having a review that asks whether to extend it or discontinue it, I think is agreeing on the remit of a review. And what a review does, it looks at the deficiency of the policy, and that's one of the deficiencies. So if we were to have a different approach to this review and look to the review and agree on the scope, I think you'll address that issue. I'm actually certain that you will address that issue.
Thank you for that. Yeah, this is something that's really concerning to me, that we have households affected by Grenfell who, at the stroke of a pen, are deemed not to be and are just in general needs and are suffering and have had no support. So I think it would be really good. And I think if the committee are in agreement, I would like to recommend that the local lettings plan review include looking at the deficiencies or where it can be improved, to put it in a positive way, so that we don't have people falling through the gaps as we currently do. For 6 years, people have fallen through gaps, and that's quite a lot of harm, I think. Thank you for that. Do you think?
Yeah.
An agreement? Yes. Yes. Do the committee agree with that suggestion? Thank you. I had another point which I think may have been addressed, which is about both wider Grenfell and LLP, where significant proportions of people registered on those policies have been waiting since 2018 or 2019. And if I've understood correctly, the reason for that is again because of shortage of supply. And I think that's all my questions. Are there any councillors in the room who would like to ask a question? Councillor, you say you have one more?
It's a general question. Since we have a shortage of housing, is there any plans to build affordable housing?
Yes, I just opened Kew Street the other day, thanks to my predecessor, Jim, and Dan and the team, which has key worker homes in, and then Castle Cocaine House, affordable housing in. Yeah. And then Barbie Road as well, affordable housing in that. So that's being built at the moment. And then, of course, as a council, when any new development comes, we have requirements that they have to do a certain percentage of the homes. So yes, and there's a few places coming up right now. One up in North Kensington on our side, and then over Kensal by this Sainsbury's supermarket, and then Ascot. There are new ones coming.
Thank you. Do we have any members of the public who would like to ask a question? Or speak, or
I have a couple of questions and I will apologize in advance. I'll try to be as fast as I can. If we turn to page 17 at 7.3, I'm curious to see what arrangements you have with housing association. It specifically says that you've got a number of under-occupied tenants on your register, and that includes housing associations. Now, on my working experience and on loads of registered providers who tell their tenants, well, sorry, we don't have anything to offer you, without taking an application and telling them to go to the council. So now if you someone downsize and you rehouse them, what happened to that freed up property that the registered provider owns? Because you're not getting it. Or is there an arrangement? Or is there a way to put a bit of pressure on your registered providers to ensure that they have gone through their allocation scheme before sending people to be on the register? Because they get away with it and they win in it because they'll have a 3-bed property on their stock that you don't get, and you rehousing their tenant. So I'm just, within your soft powers and giving taking into account that your registered providers are stakeholders and they like to be in your good books. I think you should explore what means of pressure you can have on them because they are not choosing their stock to rehouse their tenants who are in unsuitable accommodation and just send them directly to the council. So as a minimum, you should require them to confirm that their tenants have gone through that internal transfer or whatever procedure they have in place. Yes, please.
Yeah, so we like local authorities have a what is called a nomination agreement with all of the housing associations in the borough, and there's a percentage of properties from their stock that we get. We have an RP relationship manager who works with all of the RPs, and we meet with them on a periodic basis to try and increase the number of noms that we receive. They provide us also with data around the amount of properties that have been let and come through us. Obviously, we don't manage their business, so we have to some extent trust what they're telling us. But we are confident that the voids are coming through to us. Also, the properties need to be suitable and in a reasonable condition for us to re-let them. So there are some properties where they are doing ongoing works and they can't release those properties to us. But I'm confident that we are receiving, especially with the relationship we have with the RPs in the borough, we are receiving our maximum nomination, what is agreed in the nomination agreement. And we are also, in some instances, some of the housing associations have informed us they're actually giving us above what they're supposed to be giving us on a regular basis. But it's quite difficult for me to confirm
I know you've got to maintain a relationship with them because they are providers, but one saying that my Uber driver on my way here is a resident from St. Helens with Octavia. He's got a 12 and 14-year-olds, a boy and a girl, living in a two-bed property. He's been sent to the council. While they have all registered providers have an allocation schemes, they've got a stock and they've got properties where they're very reluctant to do those internal transfer and they'd rather send them to the council. So there's a way of having those conversations with them.
Yeah.
Because
Okay, so let's
because
May I interrupt? May I interrupt? First of all, thank you very much for coming and raising this important issue. I would like to see perhaps a briefing paper on that, and perhaps that's something that the officer can get back to you on as well as in clarity. Then we can take it from there.
if it's down to me, I'll go speak to them. It's looking at 7.3. Yes, you've got that statutory duty, but you bring up a property, potentially 3 beds, that we don't have here. And there's no sort of arrangements with them in terms of.
Understood. I think
I will take that away.
Because thank you, Chair.
Thank you for raising it.
I will definitely take that away because I'm speaking actually to one of our officers about risk spread just today and what pressures we have to bear. So that's something very much in the forefront. Because they're a huge part of our housing issue, housing solutions. Questions.
Turning to the LLP. And there's also, I just noted that Bournemouth apartments are part of the Lancaster West estate, but not on the LLP. And I don't understand why. It says on page.
It just say yes.
Yeah.
Because they weren't built, well, they weren't sort of operational and the planning relation was taken on. But that's one of the considerations we need to factor in as part of the review.
Yeah.
So they weren't social housing, but
So perhaps that can be looked at in the review.
And for my point on the LLP, I'll try to be as fast as I can. I have some concern because I'm the first one to say to people in the community to get engaged, but to engage and give you views. And sometimes it's not about personal opinions, it's about legality and it's about justification. And it's about us as people in the community being reasonable in terms of our expectations. I believe that we can co-create these options. And when I came here in January 2023, I looked at the paper and I said it requires a bit more critical thinking. And what we have in the paper is context, but we don't have justification and legality. And for the records, I'm just going to briefly refer to legalities, because I think the justification we had a few years ago still stands. And if you go to 3,000 people who have been in temporary accommodation for donkey years and tell them, well, look, these are the options, they would not want that local lettings, they wouldn't want those voids not to be available to them. And you can't blame them, because if I were in their position, I would do the same. And you could have the whole of Bramley House and Lancaster West Estate saying, let's renew it. Then you'd have, how do you balance that? And I think before you go out to a form of consultation, you need to frame it. And the information you give out to people for them to make a decision is look at justification and what is it that we're looking at in this review exercise. And my opinion is that actually, I don't know if it's monitoring that is more required than review. So I'm going to just give you a bit of context very quickly. So I looked at case law, and that concerned London Borough of Islington, who was taken to court via judicial review by someone who felt that he was being discriminated because of the local ethics plan. So the council said it was committed to ensuring that its new homes are meeting the needs of the local community. We will therefore introduce a local lettings plan for all the homes we construct or existing estates that will prioritize the lettings of the new homes to people currently living on the estate on which they are being built. And the judge in that case said that that was lawful and that was justified discrimination. And in the case of the local lettings plan for Bramley House and Lancaster West Estate, we have even a more specific reason. It's not just because we live on the estate. And what the judge said, he said that the policy did not create a bar to anyone on the register in getting social housing, as the policy would create churn. So for people who know what it is, it means that you free up some property. And the effect of the policy was being monitored. The local elections policy did not result in unlawful discrimination, although the policy did result in differential treatment between those in similar situation. That differential treatment was justified. In particular, prioritizing local tenants for new accommodation did not act as a bar to those from outside the area, which means people on the register.
Can I interrupt you, Samia?
Yeah.
We are growing short of time.
And I'll be very
If
brief.
if I may, I would like to suggest that what you have to say be included in the early stage engagement.
So I've got a point to make. I will definitely include that, but I've got a point to make. I came in January and I've asked for critical thinking, and I think it needs to be in the record what I'm proposing to do, and then fair enough, I'll have the
If you
conversation.
can be as brief as
I will
possible,
be as
please.
brief as I can.
Sammy, do you want to email me what you've just?
I'll
said as
email
well?
that.
Because I.
It actually said that having that kind of local elections plan meant that the council discharged their duties under section 149 of the Equality Act and section 11 of the Children Act 2004. And I think what I don't see in this paper is the legality, is presenting to you the fact that it's perfectly legal to have a separate local elections plan and it's justified. So I think the way we need to frame this is looking at whether that justification is still applicable, and it's not in that paper. And I'm concerned that we're going to end up in a position where people are going to have lots of opinion, and I hear it on the ground. People are saying, "Oh, I live on that estate. Why can't I be on the local elections plan?" So I think we need to be really clear before going to a formal consultation to have this discussion with Lancaster West area and perfectly capable of co-creating options.
Thank you.
So I just want that to be framed. The same way, I think, and I'm going to comment further, we work really well with the officers. This is the only the only policy in this borough post Grenfell that was actually co-created with residents. So what I'm asking, do not take a step back by thinking about options and then coming to us with option and asking us to comment with that. What we want in Bramley House, we want to talk at that level, talking about justification, talking about the needs, and talking at the options and the scope of the policy. So that's why I'm asking on behalf of Bramley House for us to be included in that discussions before any formal consultation, anything coming up. And I would want Lancaster West area and anyone else representing Lancaster West residents to be in that conversation.
I think that does sound sensible, especially as you say, the legality and justification is not in this paper. And I think it should be within the framing of the early engagement. And hopefully that the residents of Lancaster West and Bramley House can help to shape that early engagement. Thank you. Thank you. So that was a really, I know it was quite long, but that was a really fruitful discussion, I think. We've heard from Greg about settled homes and incentivizing owner occupiers and downsizing. We've heard about options for the LLP, and we've heard from Lloyd about homelessness. I think we're going to have some information on homelessness coming forward, hopefully. Plans for winter especially. We've heard also about accessible homes from Councillor Lane. We've heard about comparative data on homelessness. So how are we doing compared to other boroughs? What's the situation? We've heard from Councillor Rossi about the removed households and about the length of time people are waiting underwide at Grenfell. We've also heard from Councillor Isse about the long-term temporary accommodation and what plans we have for returning, and associated with that about managing people's expectations in a way that's fair to them. And we've also heard from Councillor Gardner as well about hotels. So we have, I think we have that one recommendation. I'd also like to suggest to the committee, in terms of accessible homes in particular, is there something which we can suggest to planning? We have the New Homes programme, which of course is the council, but we also have some other large scale development projects. And I wonder whether it's worth thinking how this committee can feed into planning and policy to ensure that we maximise the number of accessible homes in those programmes. Would that be something you would agree as a committee? Thank you. And we have the action on homelessness. So thank you very much to the lead member of the officers. I'm sorry that I took a long time. I'm sure we all understand how important it is. Yes. So we will move on now in that case to agenda item A6, and we're looking at the fire safety update. Provides an update on progress in housing management on relation to our fire risk management process. This follows on. This follows on from previous reports to the committee, the last one being presented on 21st November 2022. For this report, the committee also requested an update on the housing management fire door programme. May I ask, will Goldman, who will introduce on the page?
Yes, your chair. So as you say, this is an update on the previous report. We give a number of updates in this report. One about our compliance with the Grenfell Inquiry recommendations. One about our compliance with new legislation which has been enacted since we last came to select committee, and then an update. Sorry, there's four, because an update on the overall fire strategy and where we are in terms of our approach to fire safety in our council homes, and then finally the update on where we're at with fire doors. There's quite a lot of information in there. I feel, if you were the area that, of course, we are grappling with and trying to make sure that we're compliant is the Building Safety Act, because there are certain things that get enacted from the beginning of April. We're pretty well on track for that, but that may be of interest to members of the committee.
And may I invite questions from the committee? I'll start with you.
Yeah, first, thank you very much.
And I've got colleagues here who can answer any technical questions that they did.
Well, it's an excellent report. Thank you very much indeed. And we will have to continue to see a report from you annually, I think, as we sign since things develop. I'm just wondering, strategic question, what's your top risks? Having done this year's work of analysis, what's changed, what's different, what surprised you in the last year? What are you concerned about in this? So overall one, and then I've got a detailed question.
So for me personally, it's ensuring that we're compliant with the changes in legislation. So making sure that. So from the beginning of April, we will have a building safety regulator. So we will actually have come under a regulatory regime, and we need to make sure that we are 100% compliant with that. So that's my main concern. We have had a change of fire risk assessment contractor, and there has been some teething issues with that, but that has now improved. So that was a risk, but feels like that's now under control. And then finally, for me, as you're asking me, I am. I think that most of the other things are pretty well under control in my view. I'd like to see the conclusion of the fire door programme, because that's been ongoing for some years and we're in the final phase. But we are have a fire safety team. They do a pretty good job.
That's helpful, though. Thank you. My specific question, paragraph 3.7, it isn't a red flag, but that's an amber warning. 34 Oxford Gardens seems to have an elevated risk. I mean, like high risk, but an elevated risk as against other buildings. Would you like to comment on that and what the implications are? And it does seem to be quite a tired building. It does seem to be quite a tired building when you look at it.
I may bring in Darren. We have taken some remedial action, so the building is now fully alarmed. And we've had the fire risk assessment, the external wall fire risk assessment, back, and do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, certainly. So one of the things that we are required to do as part of the fire risk assessment is to carry out what's called an FRAEW, so a fire risk appraisal of the external wall. And it was something specifically brought in under the Fire Safety Act to look at effectively the fire spread up the outside elevation of a wall. So we've had that completed by external consultants, and the results came back as a moderate risk actually, which was a lot better than we were hoping for. And it principally looked at a number of sections of both 34 and 36 where the means of escape may have been or may be compromised along the outside elevations, because the majority of the exits are external and in the open air. And one of the recommendations they did come up with was that there were a number of properties they wanted assurances that there were no holes in the compartmentation from the insides of the properties, because obviously the issue we have there is with the external panels, and we had the survey back yesterday actually. So all of those properties that were highlighted have got solid compartmentation, so the risk is achievable at the moment and manageable. So as Doug has just said, we've got fire alarms in there and we've got this compartmentation survey done.
And we're meeting with the residents in terms of the capital investment that might be needed sometime next month. Is that right?
Correct. So it's featuring part of the major works, which is the cyclical repairs and decorations delivered under the capital delivery program. We've been looking at what to do with the building. There is still breadth of the scope to be finalised, and works will look to address any shortcomings of the fire safety that's been identified through what Darren mentioned, but also dealing with the cyclical repairs necessary, roof leaks, windows, walkways, decorations, and that's part of the council's capital program at the moment.
I just want to hear, it's one of the first housing blocks I visited precisely because of this. So I'm pleased to see the reports just come through, which reading. And we did already have one residents meeting. Sadly, not many attended, so we're looking into that and we're trying to kind of spread the word more. So if anyone's watching, please look out and come to the next meeting, because we need residents' feedback.
Would you like to hear the rest of it?
Yes, I just wondered if we had any sort of process going on where we would disseminate this kind of information to our residents generally, rather than just items in our properties, because I think there is an awful lot of confusion about these new regulations. I think people really don't understand them at all, and therefore they're not going to be implemented properly because there is no understanding. I mean, we have to get our own house in order, that's obviously, but I think we should be doing something for people generally.
So I think 2.6 is a very helpful summary of the Building Safety Act, but I think we can see what we can do. But with our finite resources, I mean, we want to prioritise our own stock, but also with the council, we have duties as well, don't we, Doug?
Yeah, absolutely. And we are commencing a engagement process with all the residents that live in those 30, I think we've got 34 buildings.
34 will be 35. So sorry, Kelso Fox Creek has just got its sign-off certificate today, so that will be registered imminently.
But you're talking about council blocks, are you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. And
every landlord is mandated, every building owner is mandated to have to comply with this legislation.
Who inspects them? Is it us?
It's the building safety regulator, which is who we're now accountable to from April. So we have an RP forum where a registered provider forum where we have shared this, and they're all working on this similar to us. But it will be it's the freehold of buildings that are 18 metres and higher where these regulations apply. But it applies equally to private residential buildings.
Yeah. I think something to add with that, as part of the Building Safety Act, the component which involves resident engagement and making sure the residents of those buildings, which you refer to as in scope, needs to be really at the heart of the way that we communicate fire safety information. And that's definitely features part of it with the building safety managers.
It's enshrined in legislation now that we have to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. Yes, very helpful report. On page 32, 005, you talk about personal emergency evacuation plans. People who leave, how do you address, or how do you make sure that when somebody either leaves or dies, essentially that their personal evacuation plan is taken out of the box? Or so this communication is all with people who are living in the block. What if somebody leaves?
I can pick that up, certainly. So it's an ongoing process. So the issue about personal emergency evacuation plans, or PCFRAs as well, is only as live as the data that we have at present. Our health and safety team run a continual programme. We advertise it annually in our own booklets. We write to everybody. It's on our website, and it's all through word of mouth as well. But you're right. If somebody does move on and does leave, then that hopefully that will be picked up in the annual review. But it's only as live as the data it is today. All those the information that is collated is placed in the premises boxes on those buildings, and all that would do is inform the attending fire and rescue services that there is somebody who may require rescue and support from those particular buildings.
We would love to move to an electronic version, but that is at the matter of discussion with NFB, and at the moment that's what is required. So it's up to date every time we do it, and we review it on a regular basis. That's the best we can do, but I'm sure that we will move to an electronic version at some stage.
Just for that point as well. So the London Fire Brigade won't use an electronic system because they can't ensure its GDPR compliance, because all fire engines have access to that, and they could then spread that information all across London to appliances and vehicles that wouldn't need that information. So purposefully they have held back from that. The legislation, the fire safety regulations require us only to provide that in paper format, but we liaise regularly with them to provide the most up-to-date data with them.
Can I come in on that subject? Because I had a question on that myself. How often is the data reviewed?
Yeah,
annually.
And do you have a system for tracking when people move? Or is that something that could be
We could
introduced?
definitely do that. So where we know someone has moved, but we believe to have been vulnerable, we can then check.
Or somebody that had that would be in the box? Then
We can sort that out. Actually, that's probably fair comment. We just need to check that works.
Right. Well, thank you. Carry on, Councillor Goldman.
No, I think you just picked it up. So.
Councillor Norton.
Thank you. And again, I'm struggling, so I'm actually giving the chair a copy of these questions. A few questions and a few points. My first point is just to check my understanding. These regulations that came into force early this year are likely to involve every single block of flats, no matter who the freeholder are, RBKC, registered provider, owned privately by landlord, or a collective enfranchisement of freehold. I also understand these new regulations are set out not only to directly involve the building owner or its managing agent, but also in some cases the leaseholder to, for example, when it talks about the door of their flat. This is set directly to involve anybody who lives in flats, either paying through their rents or their leasehold and their service charge bills. That's my correct understanding. As well as quite complex rules, which depend on the age and the height of the buildings. Each and every block is to face new inspections, which will almost certainly carry out works to replace or upgrade certain parts of the building to comply with these new rules and fire audits from January this year. And just to focus on those doors, are we correct to understand that all flat doors, in addition to all block internal doors, such as storerooms, offices, refuge stores, etc., need to comply to the new standards set out by the fire audits? That's my correct understanding.
I can tell you that, yes, so you're absolutely correct, answer. So Fire Safety England regs all buildings over 11 metres. That is a requirement for an annual inspection on front entrance doors, and that includes the leaseholder doors, to be carried out by the responsible person, us in this case, and all communal doors and riser cupboards, meter cupboards, etc., on a quarterly basis, which we also carry out.
And you say that's an annual inspection for all blocks, or is it more frequently for larger blocks?
No, 11 metres and above is all that's required.
an annual inspection of the doors. Anything below, and that's by the Fire Safety England Regulations 22. Anything below 11 metres would ordinarily be carried out by the fire risk assessment, but the specific inspections 11 metres and above.
And my fourth point is, are we quite confident? Because I noticed when you say it's carried out by us, I noticed you put in your report there, it's caretaking staff in some cases.
Yes, so that's for the communal doors.
Okay.
For the front entrance doors, the flat entrance doors, which requires a bit more resident engagement.
Yeah.
We employ a third party contractor who use fire door inspectors.
And we're confident that for the caretaker inspections, that our caretaking staff across the borough can cope with that.
They can, yes. We're looking to improve our recording systems with them and provide them with continued support, but yes.
Okay, and for doors in particular, we're talking about flat doors here. Examples of flat doors compliance include self-closing devices, 3 sets of hinges, intermittent strip, letterbox protection, and fire check for the door itself.
Correct.
And in the case of leaseholders, the freeholder, it says it is used best endeavours to ensure compliance. So in the case of a leaseholder that purchased his or her flat that may be in excess of 70 years old, how are we going to use best endeavours to encourage that person to spend upwards of £2,000 for their door to be compliant?
So the best endeavours is referring to the inspection regime. So you're absolutely correct. It's an interesting one and one that hasn't been tested yet because the legislation is new. So we've got a requirement to inspect it once in the 12-month period from the 23rd of January this year. So best endeavours can mean a number of things. It means that we've tried everything we can do. So we've written to them, we've contacted, we've rang them, we've knocked on the door. The other thing as well that we are looking at is taking the information you can readily see in front of you. So while we can't always make access to that premises, we can see that the door is solid, appears solid, and this is one of the reasons we're insisting on, for us, self-closers on the outside of a property so we can see that self-closer is in place. We don't honestly know where this will go yet because it hasn't been tested, and really the information will be coming out from the Fire and Rescue Services as the inspecting or the regulatory authority next year. But at the moment we are trying our utmost to get that, and we have got a record of every contact attempt we have made with those individuals.
So if we do come across a situation where somebody hasn't got a door that's compliant,
yes,
for whatever reason, are we looking to take them to court? Because it's their responsibility as a flat owner, that's correct.
We have a duty to make sure. So if we've come across a door that is clearly not compliant, and made of carbon, for want of a better word, and doesn't comply, and is within a risk area that would require to be a fire door, then yes, we go through a whole programme of writing to them, trying to engage with them, phoning them, but ultimately we will end up with having to enforce. And the reason behind that is it's a high risk for everybody else in that property, and not just themselves, but also the Fire and Rescue Services won't do that enforcement work for us.
And one would assume that the building's insurance may well be adverse.
It absolutely
give you a higher percentage. And my final question is about the cost. Have I read it right that we're talking about 6.5 million in different phases? That adds up to 13 million cost across the borough.
Correct.
Thank you.
So just to flag, there's 2 parts of that. So I forget what item it was within the report. There's phase 1, 2 and 2 extension, which the council has been delivering to date. That comes to circa £6.5 million. The recent award, which I think was March 3, has a total of £6.7 million. There's a comment in the report about the expected reduction of that, which will be realised in financial year 23-24 based on the assessments carried out in previous months. But that's phase 3 that we're working through at the moment. So I'd say it's going to be less than that £13 million mentioned there, but that will be as we progress.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lane.
Thank you, Chair. My first question relates to page 31, in relation to the information shared with the London Fire Brigade. What was any residents' personal information shared, and if so, what was the basis for sharing it, considering it wasn't a legal requirement to share it at the time?
Could you take us to the points?
Yeah,
we don't have page numbers.
Sorry, it's 3 recommendations, phase 1, the Grenfell Tower inquiry, and then the table 1, FRP 16 detailed updates, and then item number 2, under the heading progress, it says subsequently we shared information 2022 with LFP on all our buildings ahead of any legal requirement to do so. My question is just that if it was ahead of any legal requirement to do so, was any personal information shared? And if so, what was the basis for sharing it?
Okay, so yes, so I understand the question now. No, effectively, so it's purely details about the building, the way in which the building reacts, and information that the fire service could use in their attendance at an incident.
Brilliant. No, that's great. And then my second question just relates to the fire door program. And at the outset, to make clear, I fully support spending money on this. But I calculated the cost per door for the failure, which was to extend it to about £1,675 per door. How does that compare to the the usual national cost of installing a fire door? And was the contract for installing doors part of a competitive tender?
So the phases that have been procured through the council through the HYDE framework, which has a number of providers, and within that there was the competitive exercise to arrive at those framework prices. And that was the route to market the council used for the phases to date.
Thank you. But that is a normal cost to install a fire door then, around £1,600. Is that normal?
I think that's on the shorter, lower side of where it is. I think to supply and install a fire door, I'd say is marginally higher. And it is quite a significant cost, but I think it is a worthwhile investment for what it.
Absolutely. Completely agree. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rossi.
No further questions.
No. Councillor Issay.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, you don't have page 35. Page 34, 35. You mentioned you identify Trellis Tower, Alistair House, Police End, and other buildings in the 1960s. And are you saying this building, they have low risks, they have low risks of fire?
So
Trellis Tower is like the Granville Tower. That's one question. The other question is, do you have any plans to remove lighting system? And you know which can cause, fire to spread. And the third question is only for housing management. Do you involve for housing associations who have similar problems? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So that particular paragraph relates to the external appraisal of those particular properties. So we know that Trellis has got some timber decorative facades. Yes, and the same with Elm Park Gardens as well. World's End Estate. So the assessment looked at the likelihood of spread of fire up the entire face of the building, and it looked at intrusive survey. So it opened up those panels. It looked behind them. It looked at the cavities, and it looked at where the likelihood for spread was. Now, because of Trellis, the timber panelling is on effectively the face with the balconies, and the same with the World's End Estate. There is a huge concrete balconies or walkways that stops any vertical sort of transition of flame spread, and there's very little behind those. There's basically behind all of those there was non-flammable, non-combustible rock wall insulation. So why is the building, we need to look at the risk of those buildings in their entirety. The risk of a flame spread up the outside of the building is low, as dictated by the assessments that were carried out. And then, sorry, what was the other part of your question, Councillor?
Do you have any plans to remove the cladding system? Because since Granville Tower, they are really afraid of cladding system in the building. And do you only involve with housing management? Do you have any plans, housing associations, the same risks?
So there's no immediate plans to remove the decorative timber facade. So we have looked at where
it needs replacing due to cyclical works of replacing it and taking off timber and using a non-combustible. But at the moment, because they're listed buildings, or Trellick is a listed building, it takes quite a lot of work to get that. But there are higher priorities to look at the moment. So the risk is low, and we've documented that as being low. So for us, if there was, it would be further down the line where this cyclical works. So not in the immediate future. And for these, it's just for our buildings that we're looking at.
Councillor Gold.
Could I just ask, preventative measures good. What about the source of the fire? So particularly you read that the London Fire Brigade has this problem that e-bike fires and battery fires. What are we doing about that? Because we'd rather the fires didn't happen in the first place.
Yeah, so we do quite a lot of work with the London Fire Brigade, looking at campaigns and pushing that information forward. So number one, information sharing and making sure that the residents are aware of the dangers and the risks of that. We do our own audits, inspections, and making sure that our caretakers are picking that up. So particularly in communal parts, we don't allow charging or storage of electric scooters. Where we find them, external charging sockets, etc., in those walkways will always have a lockable key on it to stop people using that and charging it. But we don't actually stop anybody charging their scooters inside their own properties at the moment. We make recommendations, but there's not a lot we can do behind that front door in terms of legally requiring it. But we try our utmost to try and inform and educate the public. And I think there is a wider piece that people are starting to realise now, the dangers of that, particularly where people are modifying their own scooters.
So we have put stuff in newsletters and stuff like that. The leaflet.
Came up at TCC the other day, didn't it?
Have we had any incidents?
Not that I'm aware of, and we get I think it would be for a procedure point.
I think it does refer to the options explored to close the funding gap being discussed at the TCC, which I attended. And I just wanted to mention the feedback that came from the residents there, which was about looking at other sources of funding, such as the general fund reserve or other reserves. And I think I can see where residents are coming from, that when we are in what seems to be such a wealthy borough, that this aspect is not being able to be this gap is not being able to be closed.
I might need to defer to finance colleagues. I think I'm right in saying there are quite strict rules. The reason we have a housing revenue cap is because of the strict rules there are between the general fund. And I think I'm right in saying that while it is permissible to use capital receipts that are in the general fund to move across the line, it's not possible for reserves which are treated as sources of revenue funding. And therefore, while capital receipts are an option, use of general fund reserves is not. I'm looking at seeing some nod on my left, so
I have been looking up a little bit about the ring fencing in the Act. And it does make a difference between core costs, subcore and non-core. And I'm guessing that we will have looked at those and taken as much of those out of the HRAs as possible.
We have, but that's something we're looking to explore again in terms of.
I'm looking at that again, Chair, obviously, because there are things that the HRA is paying for that it shouldn't do. And we need to make sure
that it might not have to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, for instance. Great, excellent.
Would you like to see that aspect obviously in the budget as options, or how would that be best done?
Well, there'll be in the business plan when it's presented, there will be an account word there of effectively the services that the HRA buys from the recharges. Yeah. So that will be fleshed out.
But I think it's also what the chair's getting to, which I think is other pots of money in the general fund. How can they be used to help with the major capital works programme, which is an absolute priority for us, to get our council homes up to that standard is essential. So we will explore that.
I mean, I think when we consider that some of the costs arising are, to be fair, arising from systemic regulatory failure historically, something that this council cannot be held responsible for. I think there are reasonable questions to be asked about how we can close this gap, or at least contribute to it. So that was all I wanted to add. And that being said, if there are no other comments or questions from any other councillors or members of the public, then we shall move on to, or move back rather, to the general.
So actually, if it makes sense for three of you to come up, is that? Oh, you want to say? Okay.
So agenda item 7 is budget proposals. Effective financial and budget scrutiny provides assurance to the council that the budget is robust and sustainable. The medium-term financial planning update on financial position 24 to 25 and budget proposal report contains details of proposed areas of growth as well as proposed budget reductions. Recommendations from scrutiny will be referred to the leadership team for a formal response. Now, before I invite the officers to speak to the report, I would like to invite Councillor Pascal to give a brief introduction.
I just wanted to, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to draw your attention to points 1, 4, and 1, 5, the introductory page. Page 1, 4 refers to the report by Lisa Taylor on the implementation of the budget working group recommendations that were made in February 2023. The implementation referred to is during the budget year 23-24, and also with regards to, you might like to ask about the impacts during 24-25. Now, it's not all of the recommendations of the budget working group, but those specifically pertain to housing and communities, which were drawn to your attention in the briefing notes that Jackie Heard kindly circulated to you all, extracting the area for scrutiny housing communities from the impact. Item 1.5 is again repeating what I said in the previous agenda item, which is that it'd be very useful from the point of view of governance to make a recommendation if you make a decision in this meeting, make it pass as a recommendation from this making to the budget working group and then through which affects it to OSC, because that's the route that goes to leadership and council. That's what I wanted to say at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So to the officers.
Well, I don't have a great deal to say about introduction. So this is, as you know, what you've got in front of you is an extract from the budget report that was approved by the leadership team. In fact, those are the basis for consultation. So what it sets out is the proposals for growth, the slightly longer list of proposals for savings and income and some accounting for capital budget. So I think probably, without further ado, the most effective use of the time might be to invite questions from the committee on the either on the general approach or on the specific elements that make up those lists.
Shall I begin? Yes, I am.
Happy to start. So I'm going to talk about my questions about the growth and savings specifically. And I don't know if you've got page numbers still, but I'm on page 81 is the revenue growth. And she's talking about temporary accommodation. So because this is the sort of problems with council as a whole. So I'd like to say a bit more about that. It was going to be saving as a current financial year, the previous one, and it clearly isn't a saving. It's actually an area of overspend, and we've got some growth in. So perhaps say a bit more about that and where you see that going. And linked to that, in the capital pipeline of page 99, you've got a large sum, £12 million that's appeared in the next financial year against this particular subject.
So acquisition of temporary accommodation.
Exactly. So that's my first subject. So and then I'll drop a couple of smaller ones. So those.
So we A large part of our work on this, from a financial point of view, is effectively the kind of the running of a live model that attempts to make the best possible prediction about what the temporary accommodation is, provision of temporary accommodation is going to cost the council in the years ahead. And I mean, there's lots of factors that play into it, but very crudely, what that model is doing is making assumptions about both the number of households of temporary accommodation and the additional cost subsidy per household that the council has to meet to provide that accommodation. And you're absolutely right to say that the modelling that we have done in the years leading up to where we are now is that through a combination of the work we were doing to prevent and relieve homelessness, that is to say, to reduce the number of households in TA, but also to tackle as much as possible the cost of temporary accommodation, including by acquiring that. We were modelling a not huge in the scale of things, but a modest and steady decline in the overall cost of the council. Hence, we were proposing savings coming out of the budget. That situation has changed very dramatically in the last 12 to 18 months, not principally because of a steep rise in the number of households in temporary accommodation, although that steady decline has more or less arrested. The real driver is the unit cost. And it goes back to the question, I think, we were talking about earlier, about specifically about the use of hotels and B&B accommodation, which is the real driver of that cost. And that is because of this collapse of availability in the market in London for, if you like, private rented housing at the lower end of the market, which is the housing, which is the pool that we're fishing with for temporary accommodation. So the growth item of, I think it's 1.5 million for next year is based on our current modelling of what we think that a number of households times the average cost per household is going to be in the coming year. I mean, and every year it's a guess, and of course every year it's not perfectly accurate, but that is our best professional estimate based on that set of assumptions. The provision of capital for temporary accommodation is based on the premise, which certainly we're not alone in adopting, which is that it will never be possible for us to accommodate all the households that we need to accommodate in TA in homes that we own ourselves. But it is possible to we already own a number of homes that we use for temporary accommodation. It's possible to acquire more. And the reason that's good is that it puts you in control of two things: how much it's costing you, so you can make sure that when you're making that purchase, the cost of the rent income that you will get matches the cost of the borrowing, so that you can control how much, even if you are having to subsidise that a bit, you can make a completely confident prediction about the extent of that subsidy. You're not at the vagaries of the market or a private landlord. So it enables you to control costs to a significant extent, but it's not just a benefit in terms of cost, because it also means, of course, the council has a much greater degree of control of the quality of that accommodation, and you've got it securely. So the landlord can't withdraw it and leave you having to find somewhere else for that kind of. So there are a number of advantages to us owning TA ourselves rather than leasing it through a private landlord. The reason we can't just kind of, as it were, click our fingers and acquire all the TA that we need is partly because we're fishing in a very particular part of the housing sale market there, i.e. homes that are viably affordable on the rents that we can afford to pay. But also, as I say, because of that house prices in our borough, a large part of the homes that we might buy for use of that purpose are outside the borough, and we're competing with now more or less every other London borough in trying to secure that accommodation in the market, which means realistically we're only ever going to be able to buy a small portion of the homes that we need for TA. But that's why we've allocated some money for that programme. Based on the success we've had in spending the original allocation that we made a few years ago, we're now proposing to top up that allocation so we can continue that programme.
Presumably, if I'm just understanding this, we could get a lot more homes if we bought out of borough than we would if we bought in borough, where property is very, very expensive indeed.
Yeah.
But if we were buying permanent homes, to take off we would have to basically buy them in borough, and therefore this much smaller number.
Yeah. So it's a completely legitimate question, which we're often asked, totally rightly. If you're buying homes, why aren't you just buying them for social rent rather than for TA and putting them into the HRA? To which the short answer is, because social rents are lower than local housing allowance, there are homes that are viable to buy for TA that aren't viable to buy for social rent. But you're absolutely right that where we bought a home, I mean, actually, for any home that we own, once the debt has been paid off, I mean, it's a really long-term proposition, 30, 40 years, however long we model that over. We will, of course, then have the option to move it into the HRA and use it for social rent. You're absolutely right. We can at any time we want make a decision to transfer it before that happens into the HRA if we're confident that the HRA, because the HRA would then have to pay a premium to the general fund, if you see what I mean. So there's can the HRA afford it question, but also we'd be more likely to do that exactly as you say from a management point of view if it was a home in the borough. We do own in the HRA a few homes that are out of the borough, but they tend to be just outside the borough, if you see what I mean. So we wouldn't move large numbers of homes on a wider geography into the HRA.
Thank you, Dan. That's very helpful. My other question is probably sent for the tenancy fraud growth. That looks like quite an opportunity. Can you say a little bit?
So, I mean, this is based on a pretty straightforward calculation that the money you invest in officer time to pursue the fraud leads we have gives you a kind of a return on investment. I can't remember the exact ratio, but certainly an appreciable return on investment given the number of social homes that you can free up by pursuing that fraud and therefore move people out of expensive temporary accommodation into social rent. And of course, that's a better outcome for those families. I think there is also, it seems to me, even if it didn't make sense from a financial point of view, there's just a really basic point about fairness here, that people who are fraudulently using the social tenancy, which is one of the most precious resources that we have in this borough, it is just not, given that fairness is one of the three priorities we've identified in the council plan. There's a strong moral case if you see what I'm assuming. We're clear that the case stacks up financially too.
Thank you. And then the third and final question, the savings on pages 90 and 91. And we've just heard about TA not being there. Yes, there we are, 1991 for the housing social investment. How confident are you in that these are achievable?
So I think it's fair to say that for all of these, and we're slightly looking down the line here just to take none of my colleagues disagreeing with me, but for all of these, we are in greater control of being able to take these savings out of the budget than we are in kind of modelling the predicted savings in TA. So these are all savings where we can either to do with contracts that we're letting or to do with staff that we're employing directly, or to do with income for homes that are finished or nearly finished. That we can have a high degree of confidence. And I mean, partly because of the experience of the unrealised savings in temporary accommodation, we apply quite a strict filter to these, if you see what I mean. We wouldn't be putting stuff in that we weren't confident of being able to deliver. So they're not, as it were, RAG rated, but if they were, looking at the list, I can't see one which I wouldn't rate green based on where we are now. And so the one where we're probably the least certain of the kind of precise delivery plan is on the commercial property portfolio. But I think we're sure enough about the potential there to be reasonably confident about being defined. Is that fair, Christine?
I'm really confident about that in relation to the commercial property portfolio. If you don't mind me just adding, it's on the facilities management side because that's subject to procurement. So we can't say at this point in time, but it's an estimate based on improvements to the contract that we're proposing to tender. But we can't say with 100% certainty on that one side. But sort of around the.
Oh, was it? Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'm going to start this end with Councillor Eastleigh.
And teacher, my question is 13, budget consultation. How can you engage with digitally excluded and those who are mainly isolated at home or 50 plus people? How can you engage? How can you consult with this people? Because all the points you mentioned may not be relevant.
So I'm not sure that we are the right people to ask about the process of the budget consultation because it's run as a corporate exercise. And so there might be colleagues, if you've got questions about that, about the overall approach to the budget consultation, I wonder if they might be directed to the Early Scrutiny Committee, who might have a remit, as it were, to consider the overall approach to the consultation. Sorry, I realise that's not a very satisfactory answer, but I just don't think you've quite got people in front of you who are qualified to answer that particular question.
So Councillor Billings could ask that on your behalf, should a member creating a view that you want to go and so.
No, I will, I absolutely will do, and I had some questions around that as well, to do with inclusion.
Yeah, of course.
And in particular, what I was going to suggest is that, in order to, try to maximise the response rate that you get, it might be sensible to have, some clear, accessible, presentation of the growth and the reductions that can be found for people who have time to read the whole report. It would be nice to sort of pull those out and let residents actually see them.
Just by the way, again, procedure, if this is going to be, you may be minded to make this a recommendation to OSC, budget working group from OSC, not pick up because all the suggestions.
I think it's relevant, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
And similarly, well, let's come back at the end, what you consider for implementation. But I think that would be one.
Yes. Do you have any other questions? Councillor Russell.
Yeah, one comment and then a question. I don't think this budget is very well put together. There's no kind of overriding vision to it. A lot of the paragraphs are cut and paste from last year. A lot of the tables do not state where the figures come from. It is particularly egregious, really, and you know there are no illustrations. Those that there are nonsensical. So I know it's not you guys, but I think to will them, I think there could be a great deal of improvement in how these things are presented, because what you have to do is make someone who perhaps doesn't have all the knowledge and perhaps doesn't understand finance that well, understand that this is fitting in with our council plan. And that is the point, that the budget, well, our overall objectives, our council plan and the rest of it, as we set out for 3 years or whatever, you have to look at the budget against that. And I don't think this, in the way it is laid out, I don't really think it does that at all. But my question to you guys is, we've talked a lot about hotels. No, we've talked a lot about TA, but I'm asking you about hotels. So that if you can't find the TA, if things are really beginning to get difficult, then it's, you know, how much growth do you expect in that area? Because that to me seems like could be a little problem.
Yeah, so thank you for the question, Councillor. So our temp recommendation numbers have remained relatively stable over the last two short 3 years. So it's ranged from between 2,130. It reached a height of 2,188 a couple of months ago, but it's gone down to about 2,140. So the overspending temporary accommodation is almost solely attributed to the use of commercial hotels. What we have tried to do is we have tried to, as I mentioned earlier, minimize the use of commercial hotels. And part of that, as Dan described, is about trying to reduce the number of residents that we need to try and improve the work rates in terms of prevention. So keeping people in their homes if it is reasonable and safe to do so, and reducing the number that are going in via that vehicle. However, what is one of the biggest challenges we have is that rightly a lot of residents want to either remain in the borough or be as close to the borough as possible. So technically it is possible for us to house people in non-commercial hotel accommodation out of the borough far and wide. But we really received a question this evening about, you know, people struggling to, you know, bring their children to schools in the borough. So that is not necessarily a useful option all the time. So what we are, one of the solutions we're trying to do is part of it is working with housing associations, part of it is working with managing agents in surrounding areas to try and find more affordable accommodation and encourage residents to look at options rather than being stuck in commercial hotels or being stuck in central accommodation for sustained periods of time due to our waiting list. Actually trying to encourage them into the private sector to have a little bit more of a sense of nature in terms of their accommodation, because you've got residents who they may go into temporary accommodation and their children are 2, 3, and they're still in that accommodation 5, 6 to 10 years later, and their circumstances have changed. So a lot of it is about the conversations with the residents, and we are seeing more residents take up the sector option. But in terms of the confidence about the reducing the use of commercial hotels, as I mentioned earlier, the LHA rate increase is definitely going to assist in that, because that will open up the market, especially locally, in terms of finding suitable accommodation, hopefully in the borough, and in terms of private rented sector accommodation. But a lot of it is around our the under occupation conversation, mobilising people to downsize so we can mobilise residents who are overcrowded into those accommodations, and basically having conversations with people about moving into the private sector. But it's such an unpredictable and volatile situation. It's quite difficult to predict with certainty that, and next year, for example, we're going to reduce the usage of commercial hotels by a certain percent.
What I don't want to ever get to is a place where we just accept that hotels are part of the picture.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that's an acceptable outcome.
No.
I mean, it's not really acceptable from a financial point of view for the council, but much more importantly, it's not acceptable as an outcome for those households. And so while I think it's, you know, the premise of your question, which is it's a reality at the moment, so how are we going to manage it, is exactly the right question. What I'm not prepared to do is just to kind of sink back into a position where we accept it's a long-term reality. So it means we have to absolutely kind of redouble our efforts, both to kind of reduce the number of households who need to be in TA through our prevention work, but also be turning over absolutely every stone as alternative to that outcome for anyone, you know, for a day longer than it has to be, because it's really it's a kind of it's just appalling to be working in an environment where that's kind of at any risk of becoming the norm.
So it says here that 40,000 average cost of placement. So I take it that's a year, 40,000. So that's, I don't know, is that 8,000 would be something? I mean,
Per booking. Sorry, are you asking per booking?
Where's that? If you just give us a
page 74, 14.32.
1422.
Yeah, the average cost per placement. Oh, I see. It could be a family, couldn't it? Could be. But yeah, it says 40,000. That's quite a lot of money.
So that's 40,000 for a year. So that would be just under £1,000 per month. Yeah. Per week, I think. Yeah.
A week, yes. So, yeah, and I guess it depends on how many. I mean, you see on TV dreadful things like the from ITV or the BBC News where they've got, you know, a woman who's got 2 or 3 children and they're in this little hotel room and she hasn't got anywhere to look at that.
Yeah.
It's a particularly appalling outcome for the families with kids.
400,000 to 4 million. You take the 10 to 100, no, the average cost.
Sorry, you brought up maybe too fast from that point of view. Oh, I see.
1432.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, from 10 to 100.
10 to 100.
Yeah.
You've got 40,000. That's 400,000 up to 40 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's rightly so. It's because if somebody has a housing need, there is a duty to assess, and in a lot of instances, there's a duty to accommodate, depending on the outcome of the determination as to what duty we owe the residents. So we have to provide, accommodation. But unfortunately, I'm sure hotels at the moment is the main source of accommodation. They're trying to minimise the pay rates that people are staying. It's costly.
It's not my role to say too much, but I just have to say this, that my experience in the market at the moment is that private rentals are recovering. The economy is, it's taken a long time, but we're sure it's improving. More foreign visitors, and therefore hotel accommodation is going to be taken up. And because of the lack of the ability to put mortgage against mortgage costs against income, private rental explains why a lot of private rental people have gone out of the market. So where's this going? I don't see any shape in the market in the future and private sector being able to support you.
Which is why I think one of the things that we're looking at, because the acquisition program that we've been talking about, so far has been kind of owned by home. We're beginning to, it looks like if we can find either to lease or to buy, or perhaps with the potential for kind of institutional investment fund and other through pension funds, then we need to be thinking imaginatively about other ways to find kind of decent quality, large scale options in the market. And look at things in the way that we haven't so far. And when I say we, I mean Kensington and Chelsea Council, what kind of local governments are.
But the other thing is, unless there's some dramatic change, historically, the experience has been that when we've had an inflationary wave go through the economy, probably making the market there crashed. In the medium term, it just stays rather relatively stagnant. What that means is you're facing a 30% cost increase in capital value costs as well. Probably happening within the next year or two.
I'm not going to tell you it's not the future.
So I think the question I would ask is, what assurance is there here? I mean, there's lots of good efforts. I think this is a problem that's going to get worse rather than better.
I think that's something we all agree on.
Yeah.
And I was going to the councillors' questions, and when we summarise at the end, this obviously will be finally question. Councillor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's a more general question in relation to paragraph 1.3 in the summary. I know this case was written before the autumn statement, and you speak about the outcome of the local government finance settlement perhaps becoming more clear based upon that. There were also some changes announced in relation to business rates in the statement. I mean, in general, what or how has the autumn statement changed anything in this paper, or has it not really changed anything at all?
Well, so again, I suspect that at the kind of macro council finances level, that's a question best directed via OSC to my colleague, Executive Director of Resources or the Director of Finance. Speaking from our own particular world, by far the largest bit of the answer to that question is, as Kojo mentioned, the rising in the cap on local housing developments, which although I won't get too far into the weeds of housing finance, it doesn't actually change the amount of money that we can spend on temporary accommodation, because that's still pegged. So far, we've heard nothing to the contrary, still pegged at 90% of the 2011 HA rate. But where we're looking at trying to either prevent homelessness or relieve homelessness by finding a household at home in the private rental sector, and that's a household with benefits, they will, I think it comes in from April next year. They will, from April next year, we will have a very much larger range of options to help them in terms of the proportion of the rented housing market that they can effectively shop in. And so that does give us a kind of glimmer of hope in what is otherwise a pretty bleak picture. But of course, it's pouring more public money into landlords' pockets. But it is going to help us to achieve better housing outcomes, and hopefully therefore needing to accept a housing duty to a smaller number of households as a result. So that's the big change in our world, if you like, from last week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor North.
Just a brief one. Can you be confident and can we be assured that we are not going to get anywhere near breaching our legal obligations when it comes to hotel accommodation? The length of time.
What I can say is.
Not swift answers.
No, we are trying, we are really trying. As I said, this is an issue that face every single London local authority. It's not nice for the resident either, because in terms of moving, you know, replace your accommodation, then you've got to move, you potentially have to move again. But we are trying, and in the main, we've been able to do so, but it is proving more and more difficult.
It's a struggle. That's the 6-week limit for a family with children. Yeah, is a real struggle.
Can I ask a follow-up on that one, please? Given that we acknowledge the detrimental impact on households, especially with children, of being housed in a hotel accommodation, given that we also acknowledge the disruption to their daily life, which may be their work, their school, their health needs. When we have a family in a hotel and they are being moved from hotel to hotel, or being it not being settled, and they may be going from week to week without knowing if they're going to have to move to somewhere else, and they might have to move to a hotel, a travel lodge in, let's say, Park Royal. Is that to do with the 6-week limit?
Moving them from one hotel to no.
Does the 6-week limit start from 0 again?
No.
If you move someone to a different hotel?
No, it doesn't.
So then what is the explanation for having people in hotels in very insecure tenure, I'm going to say, where they may be having to move at a week at a time from different places with their family and whatever belongings they may have, and without transport?
Yeah, so I do a bit of reverse order in relation to the transportation, and then we do assist with that. In terms of why they move, a lot of it is down to bookings. So, for example, if we provide somebody with a booking, say for 28 days, we do try and maintain the booking and keep it going for a sustained period of time. In that time, the team is working to try and move them. However, because the hotels are private businesses, sometimes they may let in to somebody else or other local authorities who are also competing for the finances, as it were. We do try and minimise it, and it is not often where people have to move more than twice, but it does happen. And a lot of that is around trying to the other thing is what we don't want to do is from the onset say that we're going to provide somebody with accommodation for 6 weeks, so do a 6 weeks or a 7 weeks booking, because the aim is actually for residents not to go into hotels in the first instance. And secondly, if they are going to go into hotels, try and move them into more suitable accommodation in a short period of time. But unfortunately, sometimes the timings work whereby there are alternative bookings, which mean they have to be.
But we're not doing it, so we couldn't do it to gain the
if they're in hotel accommodation for more than 6 weeks a day, then there's a breach, so it doesn't matter whether they move.
But as you say, you try to minimise it. So for instance, I would want to see it occurring repeatedly within, say, my own casework, for instance. I wouldn't want to see that.
And if there are specific cases that you're concerned about, then please
let us know. And then also the other thing as well.
And that goes for the whole committee.
Of course,
yeah, absolutely. And then the final thing to mention as well, which I to mention also, sometimes due to the availability, and especially if it's later in the week or late in the day, we may have to place somebody a little bit further out than they want to. But because they want to be closer to the borough, as soon as something becomes available, we move them in.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. Page 68, paragraph 12.2. You talk about additional costs due to the regulation and the field passes of bulk. Do you have a better handle on those costs yet?
In terms of the We don't exactly have the full total costs. We do know that there are likely to be about 60 consumer standards that we're going to have to hit. We've done a gap analysis. The government will come back in February finalising those consumer standards, that gap analysis, and to get to our levels, because some of these are new. Just the costs of preparing for what will be regulation and inspection, just in terms of revenue, it's a one-off cost, will probably be about $500,000. Probably underrate that, but when it was certainly at least 300,000, but we need to prepare for that because we could be inspected from April next year. And it's like Ofsted coming in for housing. So that's what we're having to take people out of their current job to work on what we need to do to be ready for that. So should the council be inspected, but also we drive up standards.
Yeah, welcome to scrutiny, but it's just a change in the regime which takes adaptation.
And then just one other question. On page 48, 1.4, there's this assumption that contract inflation is going to be 2% next year and 2% following. How do you feel in terms of those assessments and the impact on contracts, and actually could it be more? And if so, what's the impact?
So again, these are assumptions that are made, as it were, across the board, council wide. So probably we're only qualified to talk about the contracts that we know about. Do you want to say a bit about the position in housing management?
So what we've had is a very mixed response to our capital tenders. So some have been a lot higher than we anticipated over budget. Some have been a little bit lower. So it depends very much on what works you're carrying out. There is a building industry oversight in terms of what construction inflation will go up by. I don't know what that is off the top of my head at the very current moment, but it has the huge spike we got initially during sort of back in about 2020, 21, when way ahead of the inflation going up. That's probably the precursor to that post Brexit. Has definitely calmed down, but what it's going to be in the future, we go by the recommendations of trade bodies. That's what we do. But actually, when we go out to tender, sometimes we're quite pleased by the prices we're getting, and other times we're quite surprised. But it's competitive tender, so that's where we're at.
And do you have any recurring contracts that just keep going up by inflation?
So we will have some elements of that built into our revenue contracts, most definitely, and so that has an impact on us. So we had so the cleaning contract we brought in, but that used to always go up by inflation, which was difficult. So some vary depend on the contract that's been there.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from any councillors in the room?
Chair.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
It's 14.11, page 71, cost of living. Cost of living class. And you mentioned that this money was given to low income people. How can you measure people who are low income? Because I have seen a mother with an autistic child and she doesn't get any support. So how can you measure it? You know, who is the low income people, who is not low income people? And I would like to know, if possible, how many people the council support with that money.
Yeah, I'm afraid again, you've successfully asked a question which you haven't got the right people qualified to answer, because this is what you've got in front of you is the whole budget report. So it's
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Technically, does this come under communities, do we think?
the community's probably might be best qualified to answer.
It doesn't come under communities. It comes as corporate strategy. We do a lot of work with, I think it's the Low Income Family Tracker, which is what we use to identify those households. but that's not other communities, although I'm aware of it.
Right, thank you.
So again, I think if you've got detailed questions you want to raise about that, just completely understandable, then it might be worth doing that through the main open and scrutiny discussion.
No, the chairman, please. Yeah.
And it might be worth warning the team in advance so whether you want to ask about that, so they can come ready to answer those questions.
Yes.
They might be.
Yes. Thank you. So anybody in the room? Oh, a resident.
Very briefly. We're getting at the space, we're getting an increasing number of people in the private rented sector who can't afford their rent and who are either get a Section 21 or are at the risk of being evicted. And given that the government gives all these household support funds, I was wondering whether there is any scheme in terms of helping somebody with a deposit and rent in advance. And if not, I think when you have a report on housing needs, you need to look at homelessness prevention, and you need to look at your private rented sector, because it's at that point of prevention that you can avoid people coming and applying for homelessness, and people really can't afford deposits or rent in advance. And also, some landlords do not want people who are getting either universal credit or housing benefit. Now, Brent is operating a selective licensing scheme, so I don't know whether you all speak to each other, but whether there's a way of working with your private landlord and trying to build up pressure, because some landlords do not accept that people on benefit, and that's a big issue. Because then you end up with families with a number of children in the private rented sector. We could prevent homelessness, but they can't afford the private rented sector. And these are people who actually are happy to stay in the private rented sector. So I think this should go hand in hand and consider whether it's worth investing in a scheme, a financial support scheme that helps someone access the private rented sector.
Thank you.
Yeah, we do have we do support residents who can't afford their rent. We've got, it's called a prevention fund, and we do have a rent deposit scheme which we use on a regular basis, and we also liaise with our environmental health services around not only the standards of accommodation, but also if landlords are we can't force a landlord to accept a resident, but we do engage with landlords, encouraging them to accept our residents. But in answer to your question, I suggest we do have prevention.
Thank you. I'm wondering whether certain organisations in the voluntary sector which see this sort of casework, whether there is a channel to work with you in terms of the prevention. Yes. Because we were just talking earlier about how important it is in terms of keeping the TA budget to have prevention so that we can do the priority of those plans.
Yeah, certainly our housing solutions team with a range of kind of advocates. We're always happy to build those relationships with people working in that area.
So we also hold a homelessness forum with local partners, and they're fully aware of the tools we use to try and prevent homelessness.
Homelessness forum.
Yes, we have one on Fridays once a quarter.
Quarterly. Fantastic. I would like to know more about that if possible. So, unless there are any other questions for the room or from councillors, we can be ready to move on. Again, we've had a very useful, I think, discussion, and we've heard in particular, and most of all, about what we may call the elephant in the room being temporary accommodation. And I think we certainly note the issue, and I think that we need to make a recommendation that this be addressed at least at leadership level. Would the committee be in agreement with that suggestion?
Yeah.
Temporary accommodation. Yeah. Be looked at leadership.
Yeah, I think they are, but yes, it's important.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's, given what we've seen, I think it would be remiss not to be frank. Yes. And if we want to also, I think we also wanted to think about the net zero progress and look at making a recommendation around that. Yes, yes.
The question,
I think you're right.
question is to do with the rate of implementation of the report
Yes.
to ESC.
Yes.
But it will also come in the report in general.
Yeah, so we will see
To
it
this
then.
committee.
Fantastic. So that being said, we can now move forward. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So agenda item A9.
Yeah, you want to,
Yes, agreed. Yeah. So going backwards, I think before we conclude item item A7 fully, we may have budget items under paper A7 that we may like to raise now that you're here. Page 87.
25 or 87?
Both.
Oh. That paper's not numbered. Oh, yes, it is. Sorry. Yeah.
Right. 87 and 89.
If actually you could list them so that we know they come under yours, because when I was trying to look through them, I didn't spot them.
Yes.
And so I looked at it as environment, so that should be really helpful.
I mean, I think that speaks to Councillor Rossi's earlier comment about the presentation generally. It's not as clear or as helpful as it might be.
Well, they're arranged by it's arranged by executive director, and of course.
Yeah. And so when it comes to right. Start with you, Bert.
Okay, I've got one question then, which is the same one that you've heard. The housing, but happily or properly is a much smaller one. So there's some savings proposals on 87 and 89. My question to you is how confident are you that those are achievable?
The ones on 87 around the advice agencies consortium and BCS consolidation, as the advice agency consortium are very confident that we are going into a new contract from next April, so that's been built in. The savings has already been built in the new contract. However, I would say that the actual value of the contract has gone up, even though we have made savings, because it's the consortium and we're pulling together different agencies. So even though it looks like a savings, it's still better than the current provision that we have contracted and granted to the sector.
Thank you. And 89, your others were on 89, I think. It's still spotted.
Yes. So that registrars again. Registrars is
that's not yours, is it? No, but
it is. Well, it's not. But
it's yours. Business.
It's not
yours.
Yes.
It's not
something else that's allowed us to scrutinise.
Yes. So all of these, apart from registrars, they are all achievable, and also the economy strategy as well is a view of scrutiny, not communities. But yes, they are all achievable. The BCS premises rent, I'm going to pull that out in particular because we have consistently underspent on that. We discussed that at the last scrutiny meeting about that particular support to the sector, but we are able to make that saving without impacting on the support we currently provide to the sector.
Thanks very much, and thanks for your patience in waiting, I think, 2 or 3 hours to get your star in rolled.
Thank you. Joanna?
I don't
Councillor
know.
Gardner?
Any more questions on the paper?
Councillor North? No?
And their questions.
Councillor Watson?
We go on to the next one.
Not yet.
Oh.
Nothing, we've established no more questions. Councillor East saying.
There, on page 89, the reduction in the youth participation grant budget.
Yes.
It's actually an excellent scheme. We were at Holland Park School this morning and it was a networking event. We talked to 100 young people from year 10, 11 and 6th form. And we discussed this actually with them, and there's quite a lot that these young people who are the future leaders and professionals in Kingston Chelsea would actually benefit from. So if possible, I think a reduction in that it's not good for these young people, because I think we've reached a point where we've got young people in this borough who feels that they can develop ideas and take ownership of ideas and deliver project. I think the value for them and the experience that it brings to them is essential. But if possible, I think if there's something I'm quite passionate about is that youth participation, because I think it might not have been the take-up may not have been as much as we would have hoped, but young people are certainly coming forward now. Yeah, and that's an investment in the future. So just food for thought in terms of a very good scheme that needs money.
Okay, well, we can take that away. I mean, we do have officers that just do youth participation, so I'm not quite sure what this would actually take away from what we already fund now, but we can take that away.
I mean, I can briefly speak to that. It's a very new fund, so it's only this year that we have the youth grants, which is £40,000, and there are two aspects of that: the cost of living and also youth action. And the cost of living is fully subscribed, have lots of young people accessing that. The other side of that is around the youth action and youth participation piece that Samia's talking to. And as Sarah said, we can take that away and look at that. But this is a new approach that we have piloted this year that's been very successful.
But it sounds like that's actually really useful feedback for you in terms of the proposals. I certainly take note of it in reference to our future budget scrutiny working group work. And also I note that we're talking about £5,000 of saving, which is not a large amount, but seems to be potentially having a very big impact. So please we'll take it away. Get it away. Fantastic. Did I have? No, I didn't.
It's not a big budget.
Yeah.
No, but I'm just saying in relative terms.
So that does now finally conclude item 7, and we move on to item 9. So this report provides key performance data for the Communities Department in 41 and 42, in 23 to 24. And first of all, I will ask whether the lead member and the officer would like to draw our attention to anything particular in the paper. I'm conscious we are over time, but I'm also conscious we've waited a long time, so I want to do this justice.
Well, firstly, I'd like to thank all the officers for putting this all together. I mean, I think Moira's done a great job with the restructure of the team since she's been here. I think it's good that we've got this. From what I can see, this is before I actually came into this role, that they've been very busy this year, the first 2 quarters. So, I mean, I don't know whether you've got anything in particular interest or whether Moira wants to.
I just wanted to say that we first came to scrutiny in March with a report. There was a lot of interrogation and asking for additional information for context and for numbers, because a lot of the information we presented was in percentages. So we've tried to cover all the requests that came through in March, including adding a "you said we did" section, so that you can see the outcome of some of the consultation with board, some of the feedback that we received from March. So it would be helpful if scrutiny today could ask any questions from that information, or is there another way that we could present this? Because this is the second time that we've presented this information, and so we're happy to refine it depending on what scrutiny would like us to do. But this time we have included a lot more information about the Grenfell Projects Fund and how we're engaging with that, and also the outcomes from the fund as well as a lot of information on the numbers of people responding to consultation for each consultation as well. But I'd also like to point out that we are actually over our target already for this year in terms of people responding to consultations. There is some information on page, I'd like to highlight, yes, on page 130, the percentage of citizen panel members consulted. You will note that there's quite a significant drop in terms of the numbers of people, the percentage of those we engage with who feel that they can actually influence decisions. That is because of the explanation is there. That's because we surveyed new members who at that point couldn't say one way or the other whether they had they felt that they could influence. So we feel that the next quarter and the next reporting, we should have that figure closer to previous year's figure, which was around 50%.
Thank you. Now I'd like to invite any questions or comments from the committee. And as usual,
Gives me that opportunity to go first again. Thank you, Chair. Can I just say it's a much better report than the one we had in March? So I think what I'm looking for are outcomes, not inputs. So are we getting value for money? Are we achieving beneficial effects with taxpayers' money? And there's a lot more of that in this report than there was in the last one. I think the Grenfell Project Fund, I asked for the last column, basically states are they data in progress. I do appreciate there's an awful lot of projects and getting an idea of which how successful one will be in would probably been asked too much from time to time available. Would however be interested in the main body of the report section. Really, we don't have anything on the bits section. Wondering why, whether it belongs in there.
We can include it. What we had included previously and we currently include is what we report corporately, and we don't report on BSSF. However, we can include something in the next report around that. I'm just thinking of the reporting schedule. So quarters 3 and 4, if we came back maybe the meeting in May on that. So we should have information of the last round of budget support fund that we could report on.
I mean, it's quite an important part of your activities, so we ought to see something about it. I mean, not precious about the timetable on it. But just given it's the appropriate opportunity that we get this report in the cycle, perhaps we ought to see.
Yes.
Report.
So we have an annual report, and in fact we get information quarterly on VSSF.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to necessarily be in this report, but we can report that to scrutiny whenever you think it's appropriate.
Well, I think we had a special paper on BSSF.
Yes.
But I think it does belong in the annual paper, the annual performance paper next time. But I don't need a special update for it just next time it comes onto our agenda as a matter of course.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, I do actually. I'm saying that I think this is very well presented. It's very clear to see what's going on. I think my question is fair actually. It's about community safety and it's about this growing problem that we have with drugs in our social housing. They're going in and just basically occupying stairwells. And then there was a police raid and then we left. But now it's got people saying they think they're, coming back. So, yeah, so in my view, it's growing problem of, dealing and whatever, but it's going inside.
He wants to send me something, we'll take this offline because I think it's probably not for here.
First of all,
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. First one's in relation to the performance data. Just a very big question, probably not understanding, but in the Grenfell Projects Fund round to each slide, in the diagram or picture at the bottom right-hand side, talks about distribution. The section that says 5% not valid postcode, what does that mean?
It means that the information collected, the postcode that was provided wasn't a valid postcode from the resident that accessed the service.
And what's the response to that? Is it to follow up with them and say, well, we think you might have entered your postcode wrong, could you please provide the correct one?
Well, we work with, because it's through the third-party providers that receive the funding, so we actually try and get them to enter the data and get the correct postcodes for the future. But yes, because we're reporting on what we receive at that point, that's basically the information we have. So the next reporting, it could be included amongst the correct postcodes, but because they're not tracked across, we don't know that has happened. You know what I mean?
Sort of. It just concerns me that someone could bid for a project, not provide a valid postcode, and the response is, oh, there's not a valid postcode, and nothing further really gets done.
Oh, it's not, they're not bidding for, it's the people that are accessing. Yes, so when they collect their data, I think the incorrect data.
Okay, well, that's less serious. That makes me feel a lot better. Yeah, it's still not great, but it's not as serious. Okay, perfect. And then my second question was just in relation to the appendix 2, specifically in relation to the status column, as you call it, where there's multiple responses to year 1 complete or finalizing monitoring data. In relation to the monitoring data, is it possible to actually see that, not for every single project, but just one example of what it looks like? Because I'm just picking totally at random here, but the Elysian Routes project, it says you want to complete finalizing monitoring data. It would just be nice to actually see what that looks like. That's maybe just a personal thing for me.
Yeah.
And that's it for me.
Thank you. I'll give you a clue for this one. I'm fishing for some good news here. Page 136, consultations, rental e-bike. Councillor Howard and I probably have the biggest mailbag across the borough on this. So we've obviously taken steps so far. I want to be assured that there's going to be further consultation and further positive action on this, or basically can you update us?
We would have to go back to colleagues in transport and regulatory services whose consultation this was to get that update, but we can go back to them and ask for a briefing to be circulated to members.
That'd be useful, thank you.
That would be very useful. I think Councillor Carley has a very large inbox on.
Yes. I pass a lot of it on to him.
If I could comment on that item as well, in terms of the consultation that was done on the 10 bay locations per week, I can think of one ward in particular where councillor's response to that consultation, I think this isn't your department, but the councillor's response to that consultation was not acted upon. And as a result, residents have been suffering a lot from the operational or not good operation of that bay. So I don't know if there are other wards where these have had to be suspended, but I think where we have, you said we did. In some cases, it's you said and we didn't.
So again, you'll have to take that up with transport because obviously they're the ones that implement.
Yes. Councillor Gardner.
Completely agree, much better. Thank you very much. Can I ask, firstly, when does employment get reviewed? Because I hadn't realised it was in your brief until.
Well, so that's a really interesting one because I know when Catherine it came to OSC, isn't it? Yeah, because it's one of those that doesn't really sort of appear anywhere, and then so you have to ask him to come to OSC. I think.
Thank you. Very clear. I was intrigued when I looked at the consultations. I felt I didn't know what consultations were out, and so I think it would be really helpful if there was a monthly email to councillors to say these are the consultations that are out, and here's the link. Secondly, it would be really helpful to actually see how effective our consultations are if we could map it geographically, both with where the consultations affect, and also if you have that visibility of where the responses come back. I'd actually really like to see whether actually, Lloyd's ward is fabulous because they all engage, whereas actually my ward doesn't, or my ward does when it comes to a critical issue that's relevant to them, but it doesn't on something down south. I don't know if that's physically possible, if it's too labour intensive, but it would be fascinating to see.
I think it's something that we can map for borough-wide, but when it comes to that something that's for a small neighbourhood, it's not like for like that we're matching. So we can do some of it, but possibly not all consultations.
There's the consultation hub, isn't there?
Yes.
That councillors, if you haven't got the link,
you can send that.
maybe
Yeah,
you
check
get
it
it out.
And then I appreciate you seem to take responsibility for the consultations, but they're not actually yours. So the performance stats come through here. And I know, Councillor PC has talked about it earlier as well. The draft budget, as we always get really frustrated that, one man and his dog responds, or I think it was better last year, but it's slacked off again this year. How can we improve consultation involvement? And does that come from this group or where? Because there's been a number of occasions you've said we could go back to highways, we could go back to finance, and actually somebody has to take ownership to go, how do we fundamentally expand all the success of consultation?
In terms of engagement and consultation, that is the responsibility of my department, obviously working with the service area that's involved and is undertaking the engagements and the consultation, because part of our responsibility is to make sure that we get as many people involved in responding, and also make sure that it's good practice consultation and abides by the Charter for Public Participation. So that is some of the responsibility does lie with us, and we do give advice on the best way to engage with residents and the best approaches and channels to do so. But we advise can be taken or not. But we do work closely with those service areas. Again, sometimes it's about the topic. So we generally don't get a lot of responses around budgets, although I do think actually this year I've been told by my colleagues in consultation participation we're actually have more people responding this time around than last year. And it's about learning, why they're responding more. It could be because of the overall national picture that people are more interested in this, and there are so many factors that play into people's engagement in our consultation. But we are considering all of those, but we do try to make sure and work very closely with service areas to encourage them to engage with more people and more diverse range of residents in their consultation exercises.
And I think it's been fascinating when you look at consultations that the cycle lanes in Fulham Road and Kensington High Street, 1700, and then the rental e-bikes 606. Those things have really caught some imagination. I'm almost sorry the e-bikes weren't larger, but what did we do that was good there, or was it just the subject matter? Because actually, I think we should look at whether there's some lessons to learn from that.
Yes, I think on the cycling one that a particular group got involved, which increased the numbers who don't necessarily live in the borough.
Yeah, there were responses to that consultation that were from groups and from certainly not in the ward.
Very much, yeah, a campaign group.
Yes.
So cycle lanes, parking, they always get large numbers of responses. Yeah.
I'd love to increase others. And I know with Nottingham Gate, the response when you say, can you have some leaflets, is no, it's all done electronically. I get really frustrated by that. Because I genuinely do not think, I look at we've got all these BT boards advertising all over the place. And you kind of go, could we not be using something like that up in some of our areas in order to try a different media? If I'm not going to have those people on social media, then I need to look at other avenues. If I'm not going to have a leaflet, what else can I approach my residents with? Yeah, so thank you.
You could do a sandwich board.
Yes, you can. Like the dog.
Are there any questions from any residents in the room?
My curiosity has been pricked. If we go to page 147, the project of the organization for the Grow Think Tank, CIC, it's on pause.
Sorry, what's it called?
The Growth Think Tank,
Oh, yeah.
CIC. Yeah, so the status is on pause. So how long can someone stay on pause until that money goes back into it? And what's on pause? I do need to go back and check on that, because that is unusual. I think it's the money back in the pot. So I'll check on that and you'll come back with a response.
Thank you for that. It's outstanding. I wanted to just comment on youth participation under 2.3, which obviously is really important, a really important function to ensure that young people's voices are heard. And I just wanted to draw your attention really to sort of ask about older people. So when I'm looking, for instance, at Grenfell Projects Fund as an example, because we have the data on page 128, we've got under 16s being reached. We've got 35.9%. 16 to 29, 13% roughly. And yet when we look at older people from 50 to 59 and over 60 combined, that's only 17%. So in terms of reach, both in terms of project support and also engagement and hearing the voices, I'm wondering what we're doing or what we could do to reach those older residents, especially when we look at the demographics of the wards and clusters.
So I guess we, public health and adults do fund some other groups, people like Open Age, that sort of thing. But I think I actually had the same thoughts when I went to the away day, the community's away day, that everybody was all about young people with my previous. So I think it is something that we do need to think about a bit more.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would say with these projects, because they're already funded projects, very large portion of the projects that we funded were for young people. So that's reflected in the numbers. People engaging.
Do you run a forum for older residents? I couldn't see here. So that was
BSSM.
So yes, so yeah, that does better us for it.
Yeah, so there's different, because that's a different funding stream.
Yeah.
Yes. So in terms of engagement, as well as supervision, but in terms of particularly engagement, and I think digital inclusion sort of speaks to this issue, that I think we need to make sure that while we're focusing on one area, we're not losing focus on another. It's not to a detriment.
And I think with the restorative justice consultation and the JSNA consultation, I think once we get the results from that and we can see the need, I think any of the funding like the Curve Legacy, which Sonia is working on, the Grenfell Projects Fund and everything else, we get a much better picture and see the gaps.
Yes, I think that's important. I think also I'd just like to note as well, in relation to Grenfell Projects Fund in particular, we're looking at round 2 now. Yeah, which isn't, we've had round 1 where we had the same pattern, and what we have is 6. Granted, this is limited, it's 29 out of 40 projects, so it's not the whole picture, but I'm seeing 16 projects which are health and wellbeing, compared to just 2 cultural artistic, 3 meeting needs, 2 environmental. So I think we're seeing the same pattern again as we saw at the beginning, that in terms of the call upon that fund seems to be largely health and wellbeing. And we want to make sure that that's not actually filling a gap that adult health should be doing.
Can I make comments?
Yes.
When we look at older people, we always say over 55 or over 60. We don't, but of some people, we don't go, you know, and that's it. If you're over 55 or over 60, you're old. But I mean, you know, you have to, we don't see the, you know, the 10-year cohorts or whatever you call them. So I think we can break it down a bit.
Yeah, we can.
You say 50 plus.
Oh, yeah, you see that.
May I just add just one thing? I found it very useful in my own ward. There is a St George's Lunch Club where you've got a lot of older people in one room. And if you can send an officer there with a piece of paper and put it on their tables, they will gladly give you feedback. They do to me a lot.
I think Hattie's been.
Yes.
Yes, Hattie was sat next to the table, yeah.
I just wanted to also point out in terms of older people, we should be mindful that when we looked at the funding and the breakdown of funding, adults and adult social care and public health spend the majority with the voluntary sector. And so this is about what falls in the purview of communities. There is a lot of funding that already goes towards the support of older people. And this is a very small part of that.
Sure, thank you.
Just to bring some context, because we starting year 2, the space is part of the Grenfell Project Fund, and we've got people up to the age of 74, I think. So there's quite a mixture, because when we went for this funding, we didn't want just to do one thing, and I think if you want to show value for money, and maybe for round 2, you maybe want organization to meet a minimum of 2 things or 2 priorities. Because otherwise you get the same, like everyone will see the health and well-being, so you get all these exercises. So I think it's time to be a bit more demanding and just expect providers to meet at least 2 priorities, which that money should cover easily. And then we have a bit more balance.
Excellent, thank you. I wanted to just make one final comment about the "you said, we did," which is great. Oh, before I do, I would just like to draw people's attention, anyone who's watching at home, to the current consultations that we have open, which I think is it consultation, WPC / consultations. Moira, do you have it to hand?
Yes, the address is consult.rdkc.gov.uk. That's our consultation hub.
And there are a few consultations open now.
Yes.
So in terms of the "you said, we did," I think this is excellent. I did notice that some of them are more detailed than others, and granted that's because they're coming from different places and they're also at different stages. But I just think in terms of something like, when was it? The World's End on page 137.
Reducing energy consumption.
Yeah.
Yes.
So again, that would be an example of where you consulted, you did what was said, and then lessons came back and it was being sort of looked at again. And I just want to say, I think that is a really healthy approach, that it should be iterative. That sometimes when you get, especially if you maybe don't have a massive response rate, that then potentially you may end up with decisions which, when you try to implement them, then actually that's when you get the input from residents. But overall, I thought that was really good. And thank you very much for the report. So if I may just summarise, again, we have had very useful and helpful input, I think, from the committee. We talked about outcomes, impacts, and value for money. We talked about Grenfell projects and monitoring data, which I think we've agreed we're going to have. We talked about the e-bike parking, and we're going to ask for a briefing on that committee. And we talked about, in terms of consultations, the possibility of having a monthly email to councillors of live consultations. And also about mapping the engagement on borough-wide ones where that's possible to do. So that means I don't think we have any specific recommendations at this point. Am I correct? So all that remains. Thank you guys very much for coming. Thank you for waiting so long for your item. Thank you. Thank you so much. So finally, we are moving on to agenda item 10. Work programme reports. And we're invited to discuss the report and agree the work programme for the next meeting on the 6th of February. So.
January.
Yeah, you got to do an additional meeting and we'll come back on that.
Well, that additional meeting will be specifically for budget if I've understood things correctly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So in terms of work programme, we are still talking about the 6th.
The flexibility perhaps in the sake of any key decisions turn up and given everything comes up with
That overview.
yes.
Yeah. So
We
we
don't
have.
necessarily want another 10. It's a long time since we've had a 10 p.m. finish.
I do apologise, everyone. There was the 6th of February, we have Grenfell, this Grenfell Community Programme and Code Legacy Fund. We have the new Homes Programme update. We have the Select Committee Work Programme.
Possibly ask if you agreed previously to have an extra meeting to talk about HRA.
Yes.
I think it's particularly important that you nail down a date very soon because of officer availability, but more importantly, the report that's been promised on the HRA has got to come to you, it's got to come to you for you to process it and then feed back into budget working group prior to it going to the leadership team. I think this is, Jackie's been well advised, so I think it's very tight timing.
It is, but we'll sort it out tomorrow.
What I'm saying is, what I'm saying is that Jackie will need the chair of this committee's backing to enforce that date, because our experience last year was that everything in January tended to slip.
So just to confirm then, the chair of this committee does understand the importance of the report being timely, shall we say. And we will work with Jackie to ensure that we get that. Yeah. So if anybody has any comments, do speak up.
Question, the repairs conference, what time of day is that?
This evening. Yeah. So I wasn't planning to give you a long spiel on it tonight, 10 to 10, but we had an initial meeting with the governance and scrutiny officers to set out the structure. If you happen to have gone to the social behaviour conference, the OSC round, that would be pretty similar.
That worked well at conference, and then when we had the inspector back at overview last meeting, that was useful.
Yeah.
Would it be helpful also to have perhaps an update on the work?
I think so. I mean, we've been collecting information from Housing Solutions about the type of hostels and who was in them and how many, etc. And we've also spoken to Stuart Priestley in safety, which is very helpful. We've got information as well from Adult Social Care. So next week is when we start going to see their hostels. Next week on Tuesday. Okay, I think that's right. And then we've also we're going to ask for information from the police. Are you actioning that, Jackie, with Stuart?
Yes, but we will do that. We'll talk to about that. We'll confirm.
So that hopefully will give us information about where the arrests, where people live, and etc. And also antisocial behaviour, hopefully. But next week we can read, next sixth of Feb, we can read.
Okay, so put that down. Yeah, great. Anything else? So that concludes the meeting of this Housing and Communities Select Committee. Thank you to everyone for your time and commitment and attendance this evening. And that closes the meeting. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I think it's the right.
But yeah, it's